Hi everyone, my name's Em and welcome to episode 10 of Verbal Diorama. Today we are going to be talking about Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. And if you listened to the previous episode, I had a special guest on. Her name was Kristen from So I'm Watching This Show. And I mentioned at the end of that episode, if you listen to the whole entirety of the 3+ hours, you'll know that this episode is going to be about Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, but that it was also going to have a special guest on it. So bearing that in mind, I would like to welcome our guest, the wonderful and always very supportive Sade from Offscreen Babble. Hi, Sade.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am awesome. Obviously, spent quite a lot of time recording the episode with Kristen. I'm hoping that maybe this episode could potentially be a little bit shorter. But, you know,
we'll see.
Well, we'll see, because we've actually already spent an hour prior to this recording talking on Skype. So things are not looking great. But on the positive note, we may beat the record of 3¼ hours. So, you know, either way is a positive thing. So what I like to do, Sade, is I like to just kind of say what I've been up to recently, which, to be honest, is not much, because I've been away on a holiday. I went away with my family just for a break to the English coast. So we had lots and lots of rain.
I was going to say, that sounds lovely. What was that like?
To be honest, the first day was really nice. We had some lovely sun, and then the rain clouds came in. And I think basically British weather is known for not being particularly great, and there was a lot of rain. It was fun to get away. It was fun to spend some time with my family, so really, podcast wise, I have not really done all that much. The only thing that I have kind of done is I'm currently planning a little piece for my friends over at Geek Salad. They're doing an episode on basically movie soundtracks. So I'm hoping to get that over to them in the next few days, and hopefully that episode should be out shortly. But hopefully, Sade, you've been up to a little bit more. So would you like to let people know what you've been up to recently?
Yeah, I was like, what have I been up to? So next week, I am traveling with my husband and co-host of our show to New Jersey. He's originally from New Jersey, so we're visiting his family. So I guess a lot of the stuff we've been doing is kind of planning stuff for the podcast in regards to us traveling. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to think. Next week, Toy Story 4 comes out. So we just watched Toy Story 2 last night, again, just to kind of refresh our memory. I argue that Toy Story 2 is the best film over 3, but he thinks 3 is the best. So
I mean, it's good.
That's a whole thing.
But yeah, Toy Story 2 is the top for me, definitely.
I get it. Toy Story 3 is great, but I just think Toy Story 2 is better. But whatever, I don't want to start a thing.
I mean, it's like Toy Story, so it's like they're all great.
Yeah, they're all great, exactly. And so, like, in anticipation for that, we bought like a mobile recorder, so we might go see the movie while we're on vacation, Toy Story 4, and then kind of record our reaction. So that's exciting, just to see how that will work. And then we've been kind of planning out what we're recording this week. As far as like non-podcast related stuff, I mean, like the only non-podcast related thing I have is still related to podcasting, because like I recently made that enamel pin. I made an enamel pin that says "I love podcasts."
Yeah.
And like I loved making it. It was so much fun, like designing it and stuff. So like I'm kind of playing around with like, oh, I want to design another one, but they're really expensive to make, so it might be a while before I actually produce another pin. But I've been playing around with that, and I guess that's about it. I feel like most of the stuff we're doing is like preparing for our Toy Story episode.
Yeah.
I use this company, it's called Pin Department, where you could, like, if anybody is trying to make a pin, I highly recommend it. But they have, like, they obviously are very good with, like, what they're making it out of. And I was really happy with the end result as well. Like, I thought it came out really well.
Yeah, it's so good. So basically, what I want to do, if it's okay, is when I had Kristin on the show, I just did a couple of, it was like a brief interview, really, just to kind of, if anyone doesn't already listen to Offscreen Babble, and basically a little bit about you and Kyle and all that, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess my first question is, what made you want to get into podcasting?
Wow, yeah. So I think I've been listening to podcasts, since 2008, I want to say.
Wow, a long time.
I specifically remember, like, listening, and I guess technically, the first thing I remember listening to was, like, the Ricky Gervais podcast, which I think now they have put everything into an audiobook, but it was, like, so early that, like, podcast wasn't a thing, I guess.
Yeah, it was
so
one of the
was
first,
like, what
I
do
think.
we do with this? Yeah, like, what do we do with all these audio recordings? I guess, and he's doing it on a topic. I guess it's an audiobook. So there you go. But I would listen to that. That was when I was, like, first familiar with Ricky Gervais, and I really liked the British Office and the American Office. And I forget that travel show he did with Carl.
Is An Idiot Abroad. Yeah, that's
right?
it.
I remember that was like my whole thing during that time, like at least 2008 and on. And so, yeah, I had started listening to podcasts then. And then throughout the years, when podcasts became more popular, I really loved listening to, like, anything pop culture related or TV and film analysis, like in reviews. I enjoy listening to that. And so, yeah, that's when I started, like, listening to podcasts. And I think in the past few years, I was like, I think I would want to start a podcast, which I think is what everybody says now. I feel like everyone has a podcast.
Yeah, I feel the same. Like celebrities, your dog, your grandma.
That too, yes. Like, I have opinions, I should record them. And so I think there's a podcast. I was kind of like, how am I going to do this? Who am I going to podcast with? I'm not sure. And I listened to a podcast called The Wild Line. That's still on. It's a box office podcast.
Okay.
And because I also like listening to, like, box office numbers and analysis on that. And he hosts it by himself. And I was like, oh, you could do that? Obviously, you know this because you host your podcast sometimes by yourself as well. And I was like, oh, maybe I could do that. And I started talking to my husband about it. I was like, I think I want to do a TV and movie podcast, but I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't. I was really doubting myself. Like, I'm not an expert. All the podcasts I listen to, they sound so educated on film and they know so much, and I know I could research, but I'm never going to know as much as them. I was really doubting myself. And Kyle noticed that, like, whenever we would go see a movie or when we would watch a TV show, we would have, like, really in-depth conversations about it. And he's like, maybe we should do the show together. And I was like, oh, yeah, I didn't know if you'd want to, because the other thing with Kyle, who's my husband and co-host, he is very positive about movies, and I think sometimes too positive, even about, like, really bad movies. So I was like, I don't know if you will really, like, actually review the movie as much as you would just say, great, loved it, 5 stars, Like, I don't know if there will be a lot of, like, analysis coming from that. So we talked about it, and then we were just like, you know what, let's just try it. And we basically, I would say, like, within a week and a half or 2 weeks of finally deciding to do it, that's when we released our first episode.
Wow.
So I kind of did it very quickly, like, as far as, like, okay, I'm ready to do it. Okay, let's do it,
Yeah.
But I was very hesitant beforehand and really, really nervous to do it because I just felt like, who's going to want to listen to me? There's so many TV and film podcasts out there. And I was just really doubting myself the entire time. But Kyle was really supportive and helped me go into it. And it was very nice because he offered to co-host it with me.
Yeah. Oh, that's so sweet. I love that story. I think it's so lovely.
Yeah.
But I think everyone feels that, like, that concern about, oh, well, I might get, like, my friends to listen or my family, and that's kind of it. And then when you realise that random strangers are listening and yeah, it's really surreal. Like, it's still like completely bewilders me that, like, this week, a random person in Germany downloaded an episode of my podcast, and I'm like, who do I know in Germany? And I was like, I don't know
every
in
time
Germany.
I see someone, like, because, you know, I'm in the U.S., anytime I see someone outside of the U.S. downloads an episode, I'm like, oh my gosh, really? Like, like why? Like, okay, cool. Like, it's exciting.
Yeah, it is. But I think it's only natural that you have, like, those initial fears of, oh my God, like, what am I doing? Like, this is just crazy.
Yeah.
So I wanted to sort of find out. Obviously, I've been a listener of Offscreen Babble for a long time because you were, like, pretty much the first person that I kind of found in the podcasting world. So Offscreen Babble was the first kind of, well, it wasn't the first podcast that I ever downloaded, but it was the first podcast I downloaded that was hosted by someone that I kind of knew of. But there may obviously be some people who are listening to this who maybe have never listened to Offscreen Babble. So how would you describe Offscreen Babble to a complete newbie?
Yeah, I guess I would describe it. It's a TV and movie review podcast. So that's probably very familiar to a lot of people. I guess the thing that makes us unique really is just that, like, and also there are tons of podcasts also hosted by married couples, and Kyle and I are married. But I think really our dynamic is what makes it, I guess, unique in that way. Like, I think Kyle is really trying to, I was very surprised because when we started doing the podcast, he started to be like, oh, I guess I'll, like, review it. I guess I'll actually, like start to analyze it. And I was like, oh, okay. And for me, I knew my thing. Sometimes I felt like I overanalyzed, like, to the point that I wasn't appreciating the art. I was, like, being too technical. Mm-hmm. So I think the podcast, if anybody's new who's, like, interested in listening to it, it's kind of like our journey, like, developing how we're analyzing film and TV shows and really talking about what we like and dislike. Like, obviously very familiar concept, but I think in our description we were like, oh yeah, it's going to be, like, really, like, we're going to agree to disagree and it's going to be, like, really intense. It's not that at all. There are times where we have, like, really strong different opinions.
Yeah.
But I think overall, especially for me, I don't ever want to go into a review and say, like, this movie's horrible, and let me tell you why it's horrible. I really want to be, like, thoughtful about, like, okay, this just didn't work for me.
Yeah.
Why is that? I don't want to be negative, I guess, the entire time I'm talking about it, because I believe most movies, while they are probably made for profit, are also made to, like, express something. Mm-hmm. And so I'm trying to find that out. And I think Kyle's also trying to figure that out. And it's just, like, our discussion about it. It's something that, like, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with when you leave a movie and you start talking about, like, what was up with this part? And, I really enjoyed this. I feel like that's the kind of energy we're bringing into our review.
Yeah. Yeah. And I completely agree with you on the whole kind of positivity thing, because I think it's really easy to, like, walk out of a movie and go, oh my God, that was rubbish. Like, what a complete waste of money. Mm-hmm. But the way I look at it is that, yeah, that movie might not be great. Like, you might not have enjoyed it, but it was made for a reason. And like you say, that 9 times out of 10, that is for financial gain. But also it's not just like, you know, 1 or 2 actors and a director and a screenwriter. You know, there's thousands of people who've contributed to that movie in a way. And I always kind of feel like, you know, regardless of the outcome of the movie, whether it's absolutely amazing or a complete pile of poop, you know, you still they still deserve some sort of appreciation for the hard work that they would have put in to that movie.
Absolutely.
And so,
and I think that for me, I just want to make sure that I have a tendency, I think in the past, I used to be very, like, let me just rip it apart. Let me just say everything that's wrong with it. And I think I'm trying a little bit harder now to be like, okay, well, actually, let me say what I liked. And I still will say what I dislike, you know. But I try to be mindful of, like, not just being like, I didn't like it, so that means it's bad. You know, like, I try to get, like, I also, like, try to research, like, other people's opinions and say like, okay, well, this is what I thought. I've heard other people express this, but like, so maybe that's why it works for them, but it didn't work for me, or vice versa, or whatever.
I mean, the one thing I like about your podcast in particular, and I know that I've mentioned this to you before, is it is kind of the chemistry that you and Kyle have. I mean, and it's weird to kind of say that, because obviously you guys have chemistry because you're married, so you would think that you guys have chemistry together, because obviously there's quite a lot of banter between you, and sometimes you do have like these little disagreements where like maybe Kyle will say something and you'll just be like, what are you talking about? And it's just like, that little kind of husband and wife style banter that I really, really love. Because obviously your podcast is always like really interesting because you cover like a range of topics. So it'll be like all of the things
that is
you've
true.
seen. So it'll maybe be a movie and then a couple of TV shows or I mean, you'll cover like 4 or 5 things in one show sometimes, so it's always quite varied. And I know that the other thing that you do, which I think is really brilliant, is that you timestamp certain things. So because a lot of the stuff that you guys have seen like might not have come out here yet. So
that I hope it's helpful for a lot of people, because
really
like we're
is.
seeing a lot of things opening weekend or when it just premiered. And, not everyone has a chance to watch it right away. Even we don't get a chance. Sometimes we have to delay it a week or so. And so I hope that people could be like, oh, yeah, you covered this. Let me go back to it. Oh, and here's the time code. I can just listen to that segment if that's all I'm interested in.
Honestly, it's so important because, like, I can't remember what it was exactly, but there was something I'm trying to remember the exact episode that I was listening to, but it was something that hadn't come out here yet, and I didn't obviously want to be spoiled on it, but it was obviously part of your episode, and that's when you said to me, oh well, if you look in the show notes, I timestamp so you can and that was really, I don't remember what movie that was. I can't remember exactly. It was a little while ago, so I've obviously seen it, well, probably seen it by now. Because obviously that's quite time intensive for you to obviously go through the episode and sort of make a note of all the times and stuff like that. But I find you're probably the only podcast that I can think of that actually does that. Which, when you're talking about 4 things and maybe I've only seen one of them and it's in the middle of your show, is really valuable, actually. And I think it's something that you guys do really well.
Yeah, I listen to a few podcasts that do time codes, and I always like it, but there are times where I'm like, oh, I wish I could just like, especially when they're covering multiple topics, where I'm like, oh, I just want to hear this topic. I don't think I can fast forward without being spoiled on something else, so I guess I have to wait until I see the other thing, you know, in order to hear this one topic I wanted to hear. So yeah, thank you. I'm glad that it's something that people use, because sometimes I'm like, I'm putting in all these time codes. Does anyone care? Like, I don't know if anyone really like is going into the notes section. Like, I don't know. But it is something like we tend to like review maybe 2 things, and then we have our like Let's Babble section where we're just kind of briefly recommending or not recommending something we watched recently. And even that might have spoilers. So like I include time codes on everything, hoping that no one is spoiled. And Kyle is very worried about someone being spoiled. He's like, I don't want, like, time. I was like, okay, let's go into spoilers. And then he won't talk. And I'm like, Kyle, I'm going to edit in a pause. And he's like, okay. And it's because he thinks I'm not going to pause and someone's going to, I don't know, not pause their podcast. I don't know. He's super paranoid about it.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you guys are doing everything right, because, like I say, I've been a fan since...
Oh, thank you.
Well, obviously, start of last year was when we kind of first started talking.
Yeah.
And you were the first person who in, you know, the podcasting world that I'd ever really talked to. And I know at that time you were obviously planning... Well, I think you just launched. I think you'd only had like a handful of episodes out at that point, but... Obviously I was kind of talking about, I want to start it. And to be honest, I can't even remember where we started talking, whether it was, I can't remember.
I think it was on Facebook in a group.
And that's what I was thinking.
For podcasts, like for female podcasters.
Yeah.
And like help, like a support group, basically. Because I basically like I mentioned, within a week or two, we just started the podcast and I released it. And I was like, wait a minute, how is anyone going to know what,
what am I supposed to do?
Like, so I went to this group and like it was really helpful because obviously a lot of the questions I had were already answered, and then there's a lot of different people who are also podcasting, and a lot of them were also planning on doing like pop culture TV.
I remember now.
Podcasts.
Yeah, because I remember there was that like spreadsheet. And we were all updating the spreadsheet, and I was like the only one who didn't have like a podcast to like update.
Yeah, I remember that. I was like, oh, okay, well, if we're all doing TV and film, we should all like talk to each other because we obviously have a common interest. Let's like help each other out. And and then I remember I was like, okay, go ahead and put it in your podcast. You're like, well, actually, I don't have one yet. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. And I do remember that. Wow, that feels like such a long time ago.
I know. It feels like such a long... Because I still go into the group and stuff, but now since I've been doing it for a year, I don't have as many questions. Yeah. But I think if anybody is listening to this debating starting a podcast, I think definitely look into there's so many different podcast support groups that would be really helpful for them if anyone's thinking about starting one.
Definitely. So obviously you've done so many episodes now on so many different kind of topics and movies and TV shows, but do you have like a favorite sort of episode that you've done?
Oh, okay, yeah, that's hard because I feel like there are some episodes that I have like so much fun recording. Obviously, if anybody's interested, there's a 3-hour-long episode of Endgame with M that was awesome to record. So I really enjoyed doing that one because it was really nice to go into it. I felt like there was so much to say about it.
Yeah. And there was so much that we didn't say as well. Like,
I know, right? Even when we were done and it was 3 hours, I was like, we could have gone further into
I
know. I guess I really enjoy when we do have guests. So like obviously when you were a guest, your previous guest, Kristen, and her co-host Will. Yeah. We did an episode on the last season of Kimmy Schmidt. I really enjoyed that as well. I always love when people come on to talk. Oh, I guess I should mention my little sister. Her name's Yet. She was, I guess, our official first guest. And I love when she's on just because it's just us talking, like normal. And I think she's been on a few episodes. The one that I can think of right away recently was Us, the Jordan Peele movie. Yeah. And I really liked talking to her on that one just because it's one of those movies also where you're like, oh, snap, this happened. What? Like, like there's a lot of reactions in that. So it was fun talking to my sister about that. And then also with Kyle, normally I host a show with Kyle. Two come to mind. I don't know if it's out in England, but there's a show on Hulu in the US called Pen 15.
It's not out here. It's definitely not out here.
Okay. All right. So obviously Pen 15, if you write that down, it looks like penis. And so that's part of the joke.
You had to explain that.
Just in case anyone's like, Pen 15? But yeah, so that show premiered and it's so hilarious, but like really touching. And it's about like being in middle school in the year 2000. And the funny element is that the two stars who are playing 13-year-olds are actually in their late 20s or early 30s, but they're playing 13-year-olds amongst other 13-year-olds. Okay. So it's like this really awkward, like grown person who's trying to be a kid. So that's a whole other element. But the show really tackled a lot of things that were interesting. And I really like talking to Kyle about it. Just because also, we've been together for some time, but it was nice talking to him about learning about some things about when he was a kid as well that maybe I didn't know about. And then also, I'll mention this because I'm sure he likes this episode. When the Winnie the Pooh movie came out last year, this was oddly a tense episode for Kyle and I, which is so weird because I liked the movie, but Kyle loved the movie and was getting mad that I didn't love it.
Yeah, I remember that.
So his intensity in this episode is as if I said the movie was the worst movie in the world. When really I was just like, oh yeah, it was fine. You know, some of this didn't work. And he's like, what? So I really like that episode just because Kyle doesn't get like crazy like that often, but he was really intense in that episode. So those are a few of my favorites.
Yeah, he's a genuine Christopher Robin stan, isn't he?
Oh my God. That was, I don't know if I've seen that side of Kyle very often, but I was like, Kyle, I like the movie. He's like, well, not enough. It was so odd. And even he recently rewatched it, and I was in the room, but I wasn't like watching it 100%. And I feel like he was overdoing it in his reactions to like confirm how much he loves it, but whatever. He loves the movie. It's great for him. I think it's a fine movie.
Yeah.
But that episode was weirdly tense. This children's movie was like a weird thing for us. I don't know.
I mean, I lean more towards you in that regard, in that I think it's I think it's a good movie. I think the first kind of half, I was like, wow, this is brilliant. Like, I absolutely loved the CGI and the animation of the characters, and I thought it was so beautifully done, and I was like wowed by how realistic they all looked. But it was like the kind of, I think it was more like the last third was just, I felt really disappointed by it.
I agree.
But so yeah, I would kind of agree with you, but I kind of feel like that Kyle might be cross with me if I agree with you. So I might just have to say it's the best movie ever.
It's one of those things where I was like, Kyle, yeah, but like, wasn't this a little like lacking? And he's like, nope. And I'm just like, okay, well, I don't think we're gonna have much else to say about this. Like,
yeah. I mean, you like what you like, and
yeah, of course, I'm sure there are movies like that where I'm like, this was absolutely. I'm sure it has happened a few times where I'm like, this was perfect, and his reaction is like, it's okay, and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
You know, so I definitely understand that, but it was just interesting that it's like this kid's movie, that it was so like I don't know many people who've even seen that movie, let alone talk about it, but like it's like his number one movie.
Well, yeah, because I don't think it did very well. I don't think the box office of it was really good. I mean, I saw it when it went onto streaming, so I didn't even catch it at the cinema or anything. But
yeah, I'm not sure how well.
I don't think it did very well. But I mean, Ewan McGregor is nice.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Yeah, he like the acting, but it's just like overall, it's just like eh. And I was very curious. I'm always curious when we see these children's movies. Like, do kids like this? You know, because like sometimes I'm like, this seems maybe a little boring. Would a child like this?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. You know, so.
Yeah, because a film for like Christopher Robin for me speaks more to adults and the nostalgia of being a child and that sort of thing, rather than being a kids movie. Like I couldn't imagine a kid. I mean, a child would probably like the characters, and because you know kids love Winnie the Pooh, but the whole kind of point of the film is the nostalgia of childhood and the loss of innocence, I guess. And you only really can understand that from an adult point of view. But yeah, anyway, Kyle, Christopher Robin is the greatest movie ever made. I just want that on record. And obviously, you mentioned earlier about your pins, because obviously you've got an Etsy store now, which I'll make sure that I link to in the show notes for everyone. But
thanks.
But obviously, so I know that you've got big dreams, obviously, for the podcast. Do you want to kind of maybe talk about what your ultimate kind of dream is for the podcast?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I guess my ultimate dream, which like part of me feels like maybe is partially achieved, but I would like to go further, is that I would like to have like discussions with other people about what we're talking about. I want to hear everyone's opinion. I want people to reach out to us, which would obviously require like people listening to the podcast, right? Like in order for them to know what we're talking about. So I hope that in the future we I don't need it to be like the most listened to podcast, but I would like it to be a podcast that people feel comfortable engaging with and talking maybe on social media about. And one thing that we're trying to do right now is become Rotten Tomatoes approved, a Rotten Tomatoes approved podcast.
Yeah, which is awesome, by the way.
Our reviews. Yeah, which it's like, oh, I didn't know you could do that as a podcast, because I personally have tried writing reviews, and when I start to write, it's a mess, and I feel like it's just easier for me to speak what I'm thinking than write it down. I really admire people who are writing reviews all the time, because I think that's like really difficult.
Me too, yeah.
And so I when I found out Rotten Tomatoes will let you submit reviews through your podcast, you obviously, I think, still need to write like a small amount, but it doesn't need to be like a full review, and you don't need to be part of like a major publication or anything. You could be a podcast. That, I think, is one thing we're trying to achieve, hoping that we'll get more access to more people through our ratings on Rotten Tomatoes. The only little problem is that you have to have like 200 reviews on your podcast, which I think is hard for even like big podcasts to get that many reviews. But I think we're at 50 reviews right now in Apple Podcasts. So we're getting there, and it has to be within the first 2, or you have to be podcasting for 2 years, which we're only been podcasting for a year now. So I'm hoping by next year, we're at least getting closer to that goal of getting 200 reviews, and then we could start submitting our reviews that way and maybe connecting with more people. And I like arts and crafts stuff, so like the pin stuff is just fun for me, you know, like I like, if no one buys them, that's totally fine. But I just like making stuff that I was like, oh, well, I like I genuinely love podcasts. Like, I'm subscribed to over, I think, 100 podcasts. Not all of them release new episodes all the time, but I just love listening to podcasts. And so I just wanted to like put that in some type of like art form. And the enamel pin was my way of doing that. But yeah, regarding our show, I hope that people feel comfortable enough to like engage with us and talk to us about what they liked about the show, or how a movie connected to them, or whatever, you know. Yeah, so that, I guess that would be my ultimate goal.
So I just assumed that Rotten Tomatoes was, you know, you had to be a magazine or like an online magazine, or...
I assumed that too. And then I noticed a podcast on there, and I was like, huh. And then I looked into it, and I was like, oh, wow. I think they opened up their criteria. So also, like, if you're a YouTuber, you could submit. I think they were trying to open up to different platforms of how people discuss film and TV shows.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all really interesting stuff anyway. And I kind of feel like you, like I say, because you were kind of the first person, I kind of feel like I've, in a way, watched you kind of blossom, in a sense, without sounding like super creepy and going, I've been watching you, Sade. But because you were like the first person, and obviously getting to know you has obviously opened up getting to know other people, you know, such as Will and Kristen on So I'm Watching This Show, and obviously some other people. I kind of feel like knowing you has kind of given me additional kind of opportunities to like get to know other podcasts. And
oh wow, yeah.
And yeah, like I said, kind of at the start, like you've always been very supportive of me and of my show. So I kind of feel, and I know we've said before in the past that, you know, we're both sort of very similar people in that we believe in, you know, lifting up others and supporting others, and because that's really the only way that everyone can succeed is if everyone supports everyone. And yeah, I've mentioned before that the podcast community as a whole is all kind of very supportive, and but you were kind of really the first person who I was kind of introduced to.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I remember like when you were, like we mentioned earlier, when you were like, oh yeah, I'm still working on the podcast. I was like, get your podcast out. I need to, like, I want to hear this podcast. And when you finally released it, I was like, this is amazing. Like, I was so impressed. I was like, wow, like your podcast is something I would want to try to achieve with how informative it is. That I was just like really, really impressed with it. So it was really exciting. I was glad that we connected on that support group so many months ago, or over a year ago now. No, and I agree. I think the podcast community I think there are some people who might not be as supportive, but overall, I've had really good interactions with a lot of people. And I think a lot of people who listen to podcasts are really nice as well. And I think if anybody is listening to this and you like a podcast, I definitely think you should help them out and support them in any way that you can. So if it is just giving them a review, even if it's like, because I always say, like, when I'm talking about Apple Podcasts, it's like not everyone uses an iPhone, not everyone, like listens to podcasts on Apple Podcasts. Yeah. But if you like listen to podcasts exclusively through SoundCloud, great. Leave a comment, like the audio file, like something just to let the people who are producing the work know that you like what they're doing. Because it's definitely helpful because there are so many times I've released an episode and I was like, well, that was garbage. Why did I even, like I literally am so like, well, okay, who would actually want to listen to this? And then someone says something like, even just like a like, oh, I like this opinion, or even if it's like, oh, I disagree with you on this. I'm like, oh, you listened. Great. Let's have a conversation about this, So yeah, I think podcasting is podcasters are really supportive, and I think podcast listeners are really nice as well and support each other.
Yeah, definitely. I think we should start talking about Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl.
Yes.
But first, before we do, I just want to know, does Kyle have any thoughts on the movie? Like, did you mention that you were going to be discussing it with me? And what does he think of it?
Yeah, I mentioned it to him, and he was basically saying, like, oh, yeah, that was a good movie. I think it's a movie that he probably hasn't rewatched in a really long time. But because I'm sure we'll get into it, but I was kind of like, I think rewatching this movie in 2019 ruined me a little bit, because this was, in my opinion, such a good movie. And it's a movie that I don't feel like we get a lot of today. And I guess I will go into more specifics later about that. And so when I was talking to Kyle, but I was like, this movie is so freaking good.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, I remember I really liked it. And I think, at the time it came out, he and I probably would have been 13 when it came out. And so I think from what he could remember, he was like, yeah, it was really good. And then he started to be like, wait, is that the first one? And I was like, uh-oh. This is where we get into the trouble of there are so many movies that then you start to mix it and stuff. I was like, yes, the first one. Like, we could, the other ones are a different conversation, but the first one is so, so good. So I think he really liked it, but it's just been a while since he's seen it.
Which I think is kind of a fair comment, because this movie obviously came out in 2003. So it's been a long time. And I think when you do have as many sequels as this has that are, let's be honest, subpar, when you compare them to this movie, I think the sequels have a tendency to kind of drag this one down a little bit in people's recollection, because when I was rewatching this, I was like, oh my God, this is so great. Oh, wow. The chemistry between these actors is great. But sometimes it's almost like a curse in itself that the sequels I consider to honestly be rubbish in comparison. It's almost like it's sullied the memory of this one a little bit for me as well.
I think you're right. Yeah. Because I remember when the third one came out, I don't remember how old I was. I was probably like 17 or something. And I think I saw it with my little sister. And at this point, I was like, this franchise is amazing. Like, I was like way too hyped. I remember I like had a pirate scarf and like a pirate ring. And I was like dressed up for, not completely in costume, but like almost there. And I left the theater and I was so disappointed by the film that I was like embarrassed that I was even wearing anything pirate related. I was so upset. I was like, oh my gosh, I need to get home immediately. I can't believe I'm wearing this. Like this horrible experience afterwards, because I just really wasn't happy with how the third film ended. So yeah, I think after that, I kind of never really rewatched the first one to remember why I liked it so much.
But you have now.
Yes, and when the first one came out, I rewatched it so many times when it was on DVD. I remember, like, it was a movie. I used to watch movies when I was going to bed, and a lot of times it didn't really work because I would just stay up and watch the entire movie, or at least stay up and to get to a certain point in the movie. Like, okay, I like this part the most, so let me just get there, and then I'll go to sleep. And this was one of the movies, like, when I was, like, 13, 14, or whenever it came out on DVD, that I would, like, rewatch over and over and over again for a period of time. So there was a period of time I watched it a lot, but then I guess after that, I hadn't seen it since then. So this was my first time seeing it in a very long time.
Yeah, same for me, actually. It's I can't remember exactly the last time that I saw this movie, but I remember when it came out on DVD, because I still have the DVD, and I watched it off my original DVD that I had. So,
oh, nice. Yeah.
So I obviously went out and bought it on DVD pretty much straight away, and but I can't even remember the last time I sat and watched this movie kind of in its entirety, because sometimes over here movies are on TV and you might catch, I don't know, the last hour or something like that, but you haven't actually seen the whole movie. And there was probably a couple of instances of that, because if I saw that it was on TV, I might switch over and watch the last hour or something. But I don't actually remember the last time I watched it in its entirety. So it's been a while. And I think that kind of worked really well, because it kind of felt a little bit fresher, I guess, the fact that I'd not seen it in a while. Actually, while we're talking about Pirates of the Caribbean and Curse of the Black Pearl, which, by the way, I'm going to just call Pirates of the Caribbean from now on, because the title
it's easier.
So long. And if I have to keep saying Pirates of the Caribbean and Curse of the Black Pearl every time, this podcast will be plus 3 hours, definitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, we might as well just kind of just talk about Pirates of the Caribbean. Obviously, we've got a fairly decent cast. So we've got Johnny Depp as Captain Jack Sparrow. Oh, I don't know why I put a pause in there. Captain Jack, pause, Sparrow. So kind of before this, he was obviously known primarily for more kind of offbeat indie kind of roles. And I read that he wasn't actually the first choice for Jack, because they didn't think that he was bankable, because at the time he was more of an indie guy. And it was actually, they wanted Matthew McConaughey. And
which would have been so weird.
I just can't see that. I can't see it at all.
Yeah.
It's because it's such an iconic Johnny Depp role. He's very much kind of gone in there, made it his own. I mean, the guy's done it 5 times, and arguably each time he's done it, he's got progressively worse. But in this kind of this iteration, in the first movie, I mean, he's outstanding. He got like an Oscar nomination for this role. So,
obviously at this time, what we know about Johnny Depp kind of puts a shadow on like the excitement that was there. But for me, I didn't know much about Johnny Depp. And I think when the movie came out, I went through like so many different ways. I was like, oh, who's this like new and up and coming 25-year-old actor? Okay, who is, didn't know. And then I was like, no, this is a 40-year-old man and he's been working in Hollywood. Like, obviously, like, it was like, I don't know if people have this moment when they were young, when they're like, who's that young person? They find out they're significantly older than what they thought. And so like he was a actor who I knew nothing about at the time, but after this film, I went back and watched a lot of his movies, and I became a huge fan of his, especially during the like mid 2000s. I was like, oh my gosh, he's like an amazing actor. And obviously this is a big blockbuster film. But he's done a lot of like really interesting independent films and smaller films that I really like as well. So yeah, his career was very interesting. Matthew McConaughey, I don't remember where he would have been at exactly in his career, but it just feels weird.
I'm just kind of thinking, around this time, did he do How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, the rom-com with Kate Hudson? I think it was.
You're probably right, because it was probably early 2000s that came out. So yeah. Oh yeah, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days came out in 2003. Yeah,
so
around the same time.
So yeah,
that was when he was super hot as well.
He was super hot in that film.
That was a big moment, I think, in Matthew McConaughey's career. Yeah. So it does make sense, I guess, why he would be considered.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely can't see him as Captain Jack Sparrow at all. So they definitely made the right casting choice with Johnny Depp. irregardless of what the person that he has now become, which I don't really want to go into in kind of great deal, just because this is obviously about the movie, but yeah, I'm not keen on him now. And obviously we've got Orlando Bloom as Will Turner, and apparently he only really got the role because of Lord of the Rings, which he'd obviously shot prior to this. But also I read that Heath Ledger was up for this part, but they chose Orlando Bloom because of Lord of the Rings.
I read that as well, that Gore Verbinski, the director of this film, it was up to Heath Ledger and Orlando Bloom, and they felt that Orlando Bloom was more bankable because of his Lord of the Rings experience.
Yeah.
I think if they had changed the role, I would be very interested to see Heath Ledger in that. I think Orlando Bloom, I'm sure we'll get to performances later, but I think Orlando Bloom is fine in this, but I think that his character is the least exciting. So even when they try to make him exciting, it's like, whatever.
Yeah,
no,
I totally agree.
By the time they try to do it, you're like, that's fine.
Yeah.
So I wonder if Heath Ledger would have been able to bring more there, because the role isn't that exciting for anyone,
Yeah, and also, I mean, I really like Orlando Bloom in Lord of the Rings. And also, interestingly, when I watched it this time round, I actually caught a glimpse of the tattoo, the Lord of the Rings tattoo, because it's on his wrist.
Oh,
and you see it in the sword fight scene in the...
him and Jack Sparrow.
Yeah, I can't remember where they go exactly. It's like a blacksmith, isn't it? So they're in
where he makes his swords and everything.
And when they're kind of fighting, there's like a shot of him kind of going to stab him with a sword, and you can see on his wrist this tattoo, which it looks like an elvish tattoo. And then I read after that was actually the tattoo that they got after they filmed Lord of the Rings, because famously they all went and got a tattoo because it was such like a long production and all of that. And I like him in Lord of the Rings. I agree with you that I think even if he was like the greatest actor in the world, there's not really much to go on. So I kind of feel like, because Heath Ledger for me is a much better actor than Orlando Bloom, but I think even someone like Heath Ledger might struggle a little bit, because the character of Will is kind of integral to the plot of the movie, but otherwise he doesn't really kind of do much. So I remember I kind of liked him a lot because he looks really good, and he does look really nice. So obviously like teenage me was all like, oh my god, Orlando Bloom's the hottest, because he is really hot. But watching it now, you have a lot more appreciation for some of the other actors, because the likes of like Johnny Depp, and I'll mention him in a bit, Jeffrey Rush, I mean, they are outstanding. And they're given so much sort of quality material to work with. And then you've got poor Orlando Bloom, who's kind of in the background going, hello, I'm really pretty, look at me. But to be honest, one person who does really impress me in this movie is the next person I want to talk about, because I want to talk about Keira Knightley.
She is so freaking amazing in this movie.
She's so wonderful.
And like, I didn't realize, because I was looking over some trivia too, and they're like, oh, Keira Knightley was 17 when the movie came out. And I was like, what? I was just like, first off, Keira Knightley today still looks the same, so I was shocked by that. And then two, I was like, wait, she was only 17 years old at the peak of this film? Like, this huge, huge film, and she was 17. I just was so shocked by that.
I know, because she kind of has this maturity that kind of belies the fact that she was 17 years old, because I read that her mother had to be present on set because she was so young. And you're like, this is essentially a teenage girl, but and we know that she's obviously acting as an 18-year-old, because we know that canonically Elizabeth is 18, but still, she's a young girl, well, young woman, essentially, but she does so well in this movie, especially when you look that she's pitted up against people like Johnny Depp. I remember enjoying her performance sort of when I watched it originally because, you know, she's obviously the female presence, and I'm always quite interested to look at the female presence sort of in these sorts of movies, like what do they do, how do they act. But rewatching it now, I kind of felt a little bit that she had the Evie from The Mummy kind of vibes going on, because just of how kind of smart she is and fearless, and that she doesn't kind of wait to be saved. She does what she needs to do in that point in time. And yeah, the fact she's 17 is just like, oh my God, when I was 17, like, what was I doing with my life?
Yeah. I mean, just the performance that she's giving is so, like, I don't have really any critiques where I'm like, oh, that was weird or whatever. I think she just does an amazing job as Elizabeth Swann. And I just, when I was watching, I was just like, I want to see, I mean, I haven't seen Keira Knightley in any movies recently, but I was like, can she be in another movie like this? Like, yeah, like, this was awesome. She got so much to do. It was really exciting to watch her in this.
It really was. I mean, we can obviously talk about sort of Elizabeth's character choices a bit later, because I think Elizabeth as a character, I think, is really great. But I want to talk a little bit about Geoffrey Rush, who obviously plays Captain Barbossa, who I think it's quite easy when you're kind of the main antagonist of a movie. It's quite easy to kind of give a bit of a flat performance. And I think this is one place where kind of Marvel movies are kind of let down, because they're always let down by the bad guys, because, you know, they're always like, well, I want to destroy the universe. And you're like, yeah, but why though? And they're like, yeah, but because I'm evil, you know. And obviously Captain Barbossa is a bad guy, you know, he is the antagonist of the movie, but he's also really kind of interesting, and, you know, they really delve into his character and about, I mean, he gives some really great monologues about the curse and about the fact that, you know, you can never quench your thirst, and that the number of
that moment, I'm sorry,
that's okay,
that is my favorite freaking moment. So, like, okay, I'm trying to not get too excited. Like, when he is describing, like, the curse and saying, like, you can never, you're thirsty, but you can never quench that thirst. You know, just the emptiness of not being able to actually be alive. Yeah. It's so, for me, again, as you know, a young teenager seeing the movie for the first time, I remember this being like a huge cinematic experience for me, because I had never seen like lines delivered like that. Like, I feel like the lines, like the script for this movie is so good because the lines are really good. And maybe I just haven't exposed myself to more things, but like the way that he says everything is so like, oh my God, it's like haunting, it's scary, but it's also like, oh, I understand exactly what he's describing. It's very descriptive language that they're using. That is also something that I think all ages can understand. So even though I was 13, I understood what he was saying, and I'm sure as an adult people can get what he was saying as well. But yeah, no, I think he gives an amazing performance. And that scene specifically, you best start believing ghost stories, that moment is like a huge moment for me as far as like when I think about my favorite like cinematic moments.
Yeah, it's and I think Geoffrey Rush is such an inspired choice for that particular role. I guess I'm kind of the opinion that I kind of feel like with this movie, Johnny Depp gets a lot of the commendation for it, and everyone's always like, well, Johnny Depp is so good, and Johnny Depp got an Oscar nomination, and Johnny Depp. And it's like, Johnny Depp is great, and I'm not taking anything away from his performance, because it is so good in this film. It's one of the best performances I think he's ever given as an actor. But then, you know, it's kind of, I feel like Geoffrey Rush has been overshadowed a little bit because he's not Johnny Depp. And this is obviously Johnny Depp's sort of star vehicle, and it kind of has been sort of ever since. He's always kind of gone back to Pirates of the Caribbean again and again and again. And it's like, oh my God. But I kind of feel like with Geoffrey Rush, if you look at Geoffrey Rush without obviously all of this pirate makeup, just as normal Geoffrey Rush, he looks like such a sort of kindly man. You expect him to be so kind, and for him to sort of give a performance like this and and looks so menacing, because he really does menacing quite well, but also he does charming really well. Like he can be friendly and charming, and then he just like turns and he's a pirate. And it's like, that's obviously something that Johnny Depp can't do, because ultimately he's out for himself throughout this whole movie, but he's never evil, you know, he never kind of switches to really evil. But
yeah.
Captain Barbossa is the bad guy, but he can switch kind of so seamlessly between these different characters of who Barbossa is. And I mean, he's phenomenal in this film, and I kind of wish that people gave him more credit, and I wish people gave Keira Knightley more credit as well.
Absolutely. I truly think if more people rewatch this movie today, they would come with the same conclusion. Because I think it was easy to get swept up in the Johnny Depp thing, especially at the time of this film, because it was like, whoa, this, for me, I was like, this new actor. But I'm sure for a lot of other people, they were like, oh, this actor who we didn't expect to be in a huge commercial box office film is actually really delivering. Also, he's playing kind of like the bad boy. He's attractive, and it's like this mysterious element. Is he good? Is he bad? Oh, he's saying he's going to do one thing, but we see him whispering to another. You know, like, he has a lot of opportunities to kind of be mysterious, that I understand why when people initially saw the film, they were like, man, Jack Sparrow, it's such an interesting character. But overall, I think, like you said, Jeffrey Rush and Keira Knightley, they are both giving amazing performances as well, that I think when other people watch it today, they will leave that conclusion.
Yeah, I hope so, because I hope that from listening to this podcast, someone might, you know, look on their DVD shelf, or, I mean, I to be honest, I don't know if it's streaming anywhere, because I didn't check. Normally I do.
It wasn't streaming for me. I rented it. I didn't see it streaming anywhere, but I'm sure in a few months, once Disney has their streaming thing, it'll be streaming there.
Yeah, and you could probably get all the Pirates movies there if if you want to. But yeah, I definitely recommend this one over the others. And just kind of rounding out, I don't really think we need to say too much about them, but we've obviously got Jonathan Pryce, who's Governor Swan, Elizabeth Swan's father. I will mention him a bit later, because I think he's got some really good scenes with Elizabeth. And there's Jack Davenport, who plays Commodore Norrington, who's kind of a bit of a side character. But
I think he's doing a good job
too.
Yeah,
no, he is.
He's basically supposed to be like the downer, right? Like when we first are introduced to him, we're like, okay, yeah, pirates are bad. And then you get to fall in love with Jack Sparrow, and you're like, oh, leave him alone. You know, like, but he's kind of rightfully like, well, we need to protect ourselves because pirates are stealing stuff from us and blah, blah, blah. But you kind of don't really want to root for him, even though you understand why he's against pirates. So yeah, it's interesting. I think he does a great job at it. Even though, like, he's not the most fun, it's understandable why he's like that. Yeah. I also just want to quickly because we have kind of discussed this briefly when we were talking about, obviously, doing the episode. We talked a little bit about the chemistry between the actors, because I think we're both kind of in agreement that chemistry-wise, there are certain people that have really great chemistry in this film, like intense sexual chemistry.
Yeah, like really, really serious, intense sexual chemistry. And I'm kind of talking about Jack and Elizabeth. And considering he's 22 years her senior as well, and she's only 17 when they're filming.
Yes.
I mean, considering she had been in stuff. The year before, she'd been in a great British film, I don't know if you know it, called Bend It Like Beckham.
Oh, yeah, no, I saw that. I remember really enjoying that.
Yeah, it's a really fun film, and she was in that the year before. And I think she'd been in Star Wars, The Phantom Menace, a few years
when
prior.
She was younger, yes. Yeah.
She had done some bits and pieces, but she was technically kind of relatively new at that point. And the fact that they do have this, you know, when the scene specifically is obviously the scene where he's just rescued her, and, you know, they obviously go to arrest him, and she stands up for him, and he then, obviously, because he's bound, he then kind of grabs her from behind, and his binds around her neck. And yeah, and then obviously he kind of says to her, oh, give me, put my belt on. And specifically that scene I think is very sexually charged.
That scene is super sexy, and it's like really like, what is, at 13 didn't register for me at all. I was just like, okay, yeah, she's like annoyed with him. Obviously now as a adult, I'm like, there's so much sexual tension between them. And I was surprised while rewatching. I was like, this is a Disney film. And I can't believe that this, like, I was just shocked by that.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of moments during this film where I'm like, this is a Disney film, and they're like stabbing people.
And it's like, I think I read that technically this was their first PG-13 film that was officially like a Walt Disney film. I guess technically they had some other releases like through Touchstone.
Yeah, they did a lot of stuff through Touchstone. Like they did Who Framed Roger Rabbit through Touchstone.
Yeah, so technically it's the first one, but whatever. But I just was, when I was watching this movie, I was like, I don't think Disney would do a movie like this today. Like I know there's conversations about them rebooting Pirates of the Caribbean.
Please no. Just no.
I think they're absolutely doing it. I think it's going to be no Johnny Depp. Like they're just starting from scratch, like starting.
Well,
over.
At least they're not getting Johnny Depp involved.
I think that's part of the reason why. Yeah, I think they're kind of like, well, we have this huge franchise that like makes so much money, but we have a problematic actor who's like the star of all these films. So what do we do? And I think they're just like, let's start over, you know? But my point is like, I'm very curious if and when they actually do reboot this, if they would include scenes like this that are like so charged. Like, I know if someone is just listening to this and has not seen the movie or whatever, like we're describing Elizabeth Swann put on his like hat and belt and stuff like that.
Because he even makes a comment, doesn't he, about what does he say? He says something like, I feel
like he says like "whoa there" or "watch out" or something when she's around his like
like mind the jewels hands. Or something weird like that.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly, but it's there's a very much an innuendo there,
and he's smirking and looking at her and looking like he's like enjoying it. Like, and so there's that element too, and she's upset, but it also seems like throughout the film she is not just sexually excited, but she's just excited by the world of pirates.
Exactly, yeah.
That's an interest for her, that she finds it, even I think later when I guess her maid is talking to her and she reveals, I forget how they say it, but she was like, oh, that must have been a really interesting moment. And she's like, oh yeah, when Norrington proposed to me. And she's like, no, I meant when you were abducted by the pirates. You know, like when you almost died. Remember that? She's like, oh yeah, that moment. It was terrifying. But obviously, you know that she really enjoyed that moment. And I think, you know, the sexual tension between her, there's another moment later on with her and Jack Sparrow. That I think it's part of because she also just likes that world and is excited by it.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I just am very curious going forward. Disney has seemed to come up with a formula and really wants their stuff to be watched by all age groups. And I just don't know if they were going to release another PG-13 film like this again. I imagine if they do reboot this film, it's not going to be PG-13.
Which
I can't imagine. I can't see that.
I am in agreement with you, because I do feel like Disney always wants to be this kind of family friendly. It has this kind of mantra of family friendly, and in the past they just used Touchstone to kind of release the things that maybe weren't completely for children. And I've always kind of felt that obviously with Disney making so many acquisitions, like obviously it took over Pixar, it took over Marvel Studios, and then it took over Lucasfilm, and it obviously has this vision of, well, first of all, we want to be the biggest entertainment creator in the world, and you've seriously achieved that because and obviously they took over Fox as well, which is a completely different beast in its entirety. But you know, they obviously have this vision of being the biggest. Whether that sort of translates into them being the best is questionable, because I kind of feel like with the acquisition of Fox, especially because Fox is more of a risk taker, and the franchises that Fox have recently dealt with, the likes of Deadpool, for example, is not really Disney friendly. I can't see them ever sort of taking a character like Deadpool and integrating it into the current like roster of Marvel Studios, unless they sort of filter Deadpool down, which would really affect the character of Deadpool to its detriment. But then obviously they're talking a lot about Disney Plus, and I know that they also acquired Hulu.
Yeah, they have a majority stake, I believe, in Hulu. And I think overall, yes, it's now theirs. So like I think it's you're right. I think some of their programming is also going to be like on Hulu.
I mean, I kind of foresee Disney Plus being like the family friendly, I use that in inverted commas, material, and then they're going to use Hulu for sort of the other stuff that's maybe a bit more adult oriented. Because when I look at like the Marvel Studios Netflix shows, I know Jessica Jones season 3 just premiered. Like, and for example, you'd never see a character like Jessica Jones on, you know, a Disney owned Marvel film, because it's just too intense. The things that they talk about in Jessica Jones is too intense and too adult. And exactly the same for you know, the other characters like Daredevil, who I hope will find a home at some point somewhere.
I have a feeling they're just gonna redo it,
which is so
and just get a new
sad.
cast,
It's
like everything.
It's so sad. Daredevil is so good.
Yeah, it was really good. I thought the last season was like really, really
God,
good. I was so
amazing.
excited. I was like, wow, great season. And then they're like canceled. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So I really hope that they don't go down the route of watering something like this down, because the reason why it's such a fun movie is because kids can enjoy it, but adults can obviously get, you know, the in-jokes and that sort of thing as well. And it's kind of cross-generational. And I also think that's where kind of things like Toy Story do really well, is that both adults and children can enjoy it. And I know obviously Toy Story does it in a way that is accessible to all. Like, it's obviously, you're never going to see a PG-13 Toy Story movie. But with something like this, when you're talking about pirates who, as characters, essentially they steal, they plunder, you know, they are not characters for children, essentially. They've kind of made it as child friendly as possible with this movie, but I imagine if you were like 6 and you saw this movie, it would be scary for you, obviously, because there are moments that are really intense that I do agree with the rating. Maybe like a young child shouldn't see this, but like overall I liked the things they did in this that made it PG-13. Like specifically like some of the violent moments, like there's a lot of stabbing and like you see the red blood on like a lot of things, which now with like something like Endgame or any of the Avengers films, when someone is shot, I don't really even think you see blood. No.
Or I don't think they show any blood. Like it's implied, like, oh, okay, they were shot, so they're probably bleeding, but you don't really see anything like that. And I think it's important when you're telling a story, especially like Pirates of the Caribbean, with like you're trying to establish like this is a violent, gross world these pirates live in. They're all killing each other or backstabbing each other and shooting each other and blah blah blah. So there's blood. There's that one pirate who has the wooden eye and is always constantly like taking it out, and that's gross. But it's like, pirates are gross.
Yeah, they are.
You know, like like the hygiene of a pirate probably wouldn't be the best. Like, so I really enjoyed that. I feel like the rating was necessary for this story that they were telling. And again, throughout the film, I was just so surprised. I kept remembering, like, this is a Disney film. This is crazy.
Yeah.
Like, I just can't imagine that in 2019 being a Disney film.
It feels like it's so frustrating, though, because if they are going to reboot something, you want them to at least make it to the same level as the original. Ideally, you want it to be better.
I agree.
But at least to the same level. And it would be really disappointing if they made it, PG, and they took all of these kind of elements out, because they're the elements that kind of make it really fun. And it is a spooky story, it's about pirates with a curse, so of course it's going to be a bit spooky and have spooky scenes in it. And it really, I think I find the spooky scenes they're still really effective. They're still really tense and spooky. So I would hope that they would do the right thing. But this is Disney, so you're probably right.
And I sometimes I feel like I get negative on things like this because I think Disney at this point, I think they're still trying to tell like an artistic story, but lately I feel like they also are trying to make money more, and that's their main concern. And I remember reading in the trivia for this film that I don't believe it was in China because they don't do ghosts. Like if your movie has ghosts, it's just not going to air or be played in China. And China now has become such a big element in like profit for films that I just have a feeling like if they were to reboot this story, they're going to be like, well, let's get rid of the ghost. Maybe they'll have a different curse. Yeah. Because we need it to play in China. Like I just have a feeling that if and when they do change the story, or if they have a story in the future that's similar, I think they're going to make sure to not that it has to be included everywhere because they want to make as much money. And that sounds bad because I'm obviously implying that they're not thinking about the artistic element to it. But I really just get this feeling from Disney that their main concern is money. And then they're like, oh, we want people to like stuff, obviously. But it's like, you want them to like it so that they pay for it. So you make more money,
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that sometimes a movie is great and it does make a lot of money. Endgame, I think, was great. It made a lot of money. And essentially, Disney is like any other corporation in the world, that it ultimately it wants to make as much money as possible. And I think that sometimes it's easy to forget that when you are a lover of movies and you enjoy quality content, and then you realise that, so many movies that flop at the box office, because I've looked into quite a few because I want to cover movies that have flopped, and obviously Titan AE was one of the biggest flops of all time, and yet it's such a great movie. And then you're like, but why did it flop? Why didn't it make this money? It should have done. But ultimately, no one wants what happened to Fox Animation Studios to happen to their studio. So ultimately, they are going to try and make as much money as possible. And I agree with you on the whole China thing. I think China's become such an important release country for a lot of movies. I noticed recently, and it's become like I don't know if it's a really recent thing, but I've noticed that a lot of movies now are sort of co-financed by Chinese companies, and obviously a lot of movies are now set in China to obviously help the Chinese appeal, because China's such a massive market. And I think it is important to have that accessibility, but obviously the Chinese do have very strict rules, like you said. So
and that's where it becomes an issue if you do want to tell a ghost story or something that's like ghost adjacent. It gets a little difficult. It
really does. Just sort of back on the chemistry, because I just wanted to kind of mention that obviously we mentioned like Jack and Elizabeth, but obviously additionally Jack and Barbossa, I think, have really good chemistry as well. They kind of spar off each other really well, and Barbossa doesn't trust Jack, but he also kind of does trust Jack as well. And they obviously have this history because Barbossa backstabbed him and led a mutiny against him, and so Jack is obviously a little bit pissed still. But I think that those two actors really work well together as well. And additionally, I know like we kind of mentioned Orlando Bloom, but I think that Jack and Will do have some quite good chemistry as well together. But it's really the main kind of issue for me is when you kind of have Will and Elizabeth together, because this is kind of the big romance of the film, and we basically need to believe that she would choose him over Commodore Norrington, which isn't the most difficult thing to kind of imagine, because Norrington isn't really built up as anything other than the lawful good guy who obviously saw this child on the ship and now he's madly in love with her, which is a bit weird.
Which again is another thing I don't think Disney would do. Like, literally, this man, this grown person, knew her as a child, and then literally she's barely an adult, and he's talking about marrying her, which is probably realistic to that era, of course.
Yeah, probably.
And I think it's a good element of the film, but I just feel like Disney today would be like, no, this is problematic.
It is like, super creepy.
You know, like, like, I feel like they'd be like, no, we can't do that. But yeah, I think also the thing that keeps Elizabeth Swann away from Norrington is that he so aggressively hates pirates, right?
Yeah.
And she is so fascinated by it and interested in it that it would never work because she clearly wants that adventurous type of lifestyle.
Yeah.
And he does not. And yeah, to speak on the chemistry between Orlando Bloom and Keira Knightley, you know, it's hard because I really feel like I understand why Keira Knightley seemed intrigued, or I'm sorry, Elizabeth Swann seemed intrigued by Will Turner because she knows that he's either a pirate or is connected to pirates because when they found him, he had the necklace, right? And so she probably has always had some attraction to him to just learn more about him, but he has become this like straight-laced, maybe kind of boring person. And yeah, I wish they would have shown that maybe he wasn't as like a goody two shoes because like it is kind of like, what is she attracted to at the beginning of him? Like he is attractive, but like what is their connection there? Why would she be into him unless he was still kind of being a little bit rebellious or was embracing that? Because it seems like Will Turner's struggle throughout the film is that he knows something about, he had a pirate necklace and he wasn't like a baby, so he knew something, right? But it seems like he was trying to reject it, like absolutely not, it's not me, it's not part of my life, no. And then obviously at the end he's maybe coming to terms with the fact that that is his life and his father was a pirate and all that stuff. But yeah, I don't know. The chemistry, I thought when they had to be like lovey-dovey, like look at each other and stuff, I thought that was okay. But it's just jarring when you see the white-hot chemistry of her with Jack Sparrow. Yeah. And when you see it like next to each other, like, well, why isn't she with Jack Sparrow? Like,
I know.
That's who, you know.
Well, that's like, who she's attracted to. She's attracted to the pirate.
Yeah, that's who she wants to be with. And he is not that, you know, like, so it is a little bit of, I won't say entirely a misstep, but I think I think when you're making this film, you probably didn't realize like how connected Elizabeth Swann and Jack Sparrow would be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the other thing that kind of sticks in my mind is there's a scene at the start where Will Turner brings the sword over to Governor Swann's house to, obviously, it's the sword that they're going to give to Commodore Norrington. And and obviously Elizabeth sees him and she's really happy to see him, but then kind of she gets rebuffed by him a little bit. And her father
he keeps calling her Miss
Swan.
And
her father says, you know, well, at least the boy has a sense of propriety or something like that. So it's clear from that obviously Will Turner has grown up, he's become like a blacksmith's apprentice, and he's kind of obviously honed his blacksmith skills and makes all these amazing swords and weapons and stuff. But then you're like, but what else has he actually done? Like, other than just be a really good citizen and loved Elizabeth from afar? Like, what?
Yeah, it seems like his whole journey was, I'm not a pirate, I'm going to be the best upright, you know, like basic person, you know, like it seems like that's his main thing. And she seems to find it a little bit irritating, but also we're supposed to believe that she's also in love with him. So yeah, that's a bit of a, doesn't 100% work, but I'm okay with it because they're fine together.
Yeah. I think obviously you mentioned earlier that the movie was directed by Gore Verbinski. I just kind of wanted to obviously go through the people it was written by. It was written by Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, and additional writing by Stuart Beattie and Jay Walpert. The score, which we do need to talk about because it's amazing score, was by Klaus Bedelt and Hans Zimmer. And I thought it was quite interesting that some additional music was done by Ramin Djawadi, who does the Game of Thrones music.
Oh, interesting.
And I thought that was quite interesting because Game of Thrones, that sort of theme song is so iconic.
Yeah, the theme song is iconic. Yeah.
And the fact he was involved in this kind of speaks volumes a little bit. But he didn't do the majority of the score. That was kind of, I think it's mainly kind of seen as a Hans Zimmer score. And when we talk about Pirates of the Caribbean, obviously the reason this movie came about was because it was a ride at Disneyland. And the ride opened in 1967. And interestingly, it was the last ride that was actually overseen by Walt Disney himself before he passed away.
Oh, okay.
So the ride has since been enhanced with bits from the movies. Like I think they added like animatronic Jack Sparrows and
yes.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask if you've been on the ride before, because me personally, I've only been on the ride after the films have come out. So I have only seen the version of the Jack Sparrow version of the ride, which is a whole bunch of Jack Sparrows throughout the film.
Do you know, I've been to Disneyland in California, and I've also been to Walt Disney World in Florida. So I went to Disneyland in 2010, and I went to Walt Disney World in Florida in 2013. And I was trying to figure out which park I went on the ride. And I think it was Disneyland in California in 2010. And because I do recall all of the Jack Sparrows. And I also remember, because I don't really like scary rides. So I do recall having my eyes closed for a portion of it, which is quite ridiculous, actually. And I'm embarrassed to admit that happened. But yeah, I did go on it, but obviously it was after the movie came out, because I didn't visit the parks at any point before then. So I don't know what it was like before.
Yeah, when I was a child, like when I was 3, I went to Disneyland, but I don't remember anything about it. So I don't even know if I went on the ride at that point. But so when the movie came out and everyone's like, oh, like the ride, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I didn't know the connection to the ride. And obviously the ride, I think even before the whole Johnny Depp element was added, I don't think had a very big narrative throughout it. So the film is, I guess, inspired by the ride, but I don't think a lot of the story is connected in any way beyond just the ride. Yeah, like, okay, the ride was a starting point and then they went with it.
Yeah, the fact that they made essentially a whole movie franchise on a ride is quite phenomenal just in itself. Not to mention that the whole kind of pirate genre in movies it was basically box office poison at this point, because the kind of last time they tried to do a big pirate movie was actually a movie that I'm very fond of, which is Cutthroat Island. And
I've never seen that.
It's really fun. It's Gina Davis and Matthew Modine. It was a massive flop because it cost so much money, essentially, is the reason why it flopped. I've got it on my list to cover. I'm not going to cover it anytime soon because I'm not going to cover a pirate movie and then another pirate movie like 2 episodes later, because that would be ridiculous. But it's such good fun. The fact that not only is this based on a ride, but it's also based on a genre film that is essentially, at this time, dead in the water is quite phenomenal. That they pulled it off and they did it so well. Like, it's like lightning in a bottle. All of these elements coming together, and even if they reboot it, they're never going to match all of, like, the cast and the locations and the story and, the elements of the story and all of that. It's never going to kind of happen again. And that's quite impressive and outstanding. And that's why I find this movie so fascinating, is by all accounts it should have failed really spectacularly, and it didn't.
That was something that I didn't look into exactly how much it would be like in 2019 money.
No, I didn't either.
In 2003, I think it was like $140 million to make.
Yeah, which is kind of not very much. I mean, even then.
I mean, for a blockbuster film, at least it sounds like okay. I don't know what that would be today, if that would be like significantly more. But it just felt like when I mentioned earlier, when I was like, man, rewatching this film really like made me miss movies like this. And I guess what I'm thinking is like, this is obviously a big budget, like superstars, like big glossy film, right? And I think it came out during the summer, so it's expected to be a summer blockbuster movie. But I'm trying to say like the stakes of it are very, I don't want to say low, but like are very like intimate to the specific characters, if that makes sense. Like the whole issue is they're cursed and they don't want to be cursed anymore. And Elizabeth Swann has the necklace that will help them become uncursed. But I feel like movies today that are big blockbuster films are like, it's the end of the world. Every single person's going to die unless these people get the box that's glowing or whatever, or these superheroes that do this thing or whatever that save the world. And I think, I'm not trying to say I don't like those films because obviously I enjoy them, but it just feels like today every film is like
the stakes always have to be higher every single time, like.
Yeah, and it just felt so refreshing to watch this movie again, where it was like, you know, definitely tense. You're worried about Elizabeth Swann because they think they need to take her blood, you know, to take their curse. So you're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? But otherwise, it's like, this is so exciting. It's like, it's just a different feeling. It's not so dreadful versus these other blockbuster films, I think, that we're so used to today that are so all about like the end of the world or the society is going to crumble or whatever. That it just sometimes, even though those films are fun, because they are relying on like your emotional connection to, I don't know, wanting to be alive. Like, you know, they could be a little bit dreadful. Like they could be a little bit sad. And this was just more of like, yeah, gold coins. Yeah, you know, like, it's like fun. You know?
Yeah. So, you know, the new reboot's probably going to be like, oh, the pirates have to save the world from extinction of the other pirates who've got a special
like
trinket.
The world is about to explode. But who would know? The only people who could save the world are pirates. What? Like, it's probably going to be something like that. Like, I mean, I hope not. But, it does feel like most movies are like that, where it's like, oh my gosh, this one big thing's about to happen. And this one character is the only person who could save the day.
And also, that character doesn't smoke, doesn't drink, doesn't swear, doesn't have any sexual contact with any other person, doesn't draw blood.
And, like, that's the other thing, like, when Jack Sparrow's, like, drinking so much, I was just like, again, this is a Disney film. Like, he is drinking, and I guess it could be used for humor, you know, like, how much he's drinking, but, like, it was also kind of dark when they were stranded on that island, and he kind of just thought, like, well, this is the end, you know, so let's just get drunk. And, you know, like, let's just do this, you know? And I was like, wow, yeah, this is like what would happen. But I don't know if Disney would really embrace that today. Who knows? Yeah. But...
yeah, not really sure. But interestingly, I don't know if you know, it was they contemplated doing like it as direct-to-video movie.
I did read that, which is crazy to think of.
I mean, when I think of direct-to-video, I think of like Lady and the Tramp 2, or, you know, Cinderella 2. Or,
Disney has a lot of those, like, direct-to-video movies, which I think now they're going to kind of start up again with their streaming service. So that is a thing, but I just can't even imagine this as a direct-to-video movie. No, and the casting choices for that direct-to-video were Cary Elwes, who was Wesley in The Princess Bride. This is as Captain Jack, so I can't see him doing it. Actually, a really fun choice, and I don't know if you know who this is. It's a British actor who sadly passed away a few years ago, a guy called Rick Mayall. No, I don't know who that is.
He's very eccentric comedian. He has basically done quite a lot of iconic sort of British comedy. He did like comedy called The Young Ones, and he actually did star in a movie called Drop Dead Fred.
Oh no, I haven't seen that either.
It's gross. It's completely gross. It's got Phoebe Cates, who obviously was big in like the 80s. Yeah, she's in Drop Dead Fred, and Rick Mayall plays Fred, who's basically her childhood imaginary friend who kind of comes back to life in her adulthood. I can see him do a version of Captain Jack, but it would be nothing like Johnny Depp. He had a very specific, it was a very British sense of humour, which maybe wouldn't translate well to like an international audience. And Christopher Walken was the other name that was kind of mooted.
Yeah, that's the one I'm like, no. Like Christopher, like because I did come across this piece of trivia as well, and that I'm like, I cannot see that. I think I also saw, maybe not for the direct to video, but at one point Robert De Niro was considered. And he said no, but then later on, he made sure to play like a pirate in another movie, like a few years later, because he was like, man, I missed the opportunity. I missed the pirate opportunity when it came to me.
Did you see him in Stardust?
That's the movie he took. Yeah. No, I never saw Stardust. I don't know if he's going to...
I highly recommend that movie. It's based on a Neil Gaiman book. Obviously, Neil Gaiman's kind of in the public kind of at the moment because of his collaboration with Terry Pratchett. Good Omens is out right now.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, Stardust is one of Neil Gaiman's kind of earlier works, and it's such a wonderful... It's like a fairy tale. It's like...
It sounds like Robert De Niro is like, yeah, I'm not missing this pirate money again.
He's so good. He's so good in that film.
Yeah, so that's interesting.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend you see that. I've forgotten where we were. Oh, we're talking about Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yes.
Filming wise, it's obviously primarily filmed in like practical locations, which is I think why the movie looks so great, because it's obviously filmed on real ships and on the real water, in the ocean, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I think the Port Royal was a set in California, and I know they did some kind of, I think they did some green screen stuff, but I think it is a minority because the film looks so great because of the practical locations, I think, which were, I think it was St. Vincent and the Dominican Republic were the main kind of filming spots. And it's so beautiful. Like, you could just imagine going to an island, like they're stranded on, and like have these beautiful white sandy beaches and crystal clear blue water, and it's so beautiful. It's astonishingly beautiful. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about the choreography, because I think the sword fights are particularly good in this film, and I like sword fights generally, but interestingly, the sword fight choreography was done by a guy called Bob Anderson, and he worked on Star Wars.
That's cool. Okay.
And he doubled as Darth Vader for some of the lightsaber battles.
Nice.
So there's obviously a bit of a link there, and I just thought the sword fights were really good, and I think the choreography was excellent. And obviously we're calling it Pirates of the Caribbean because it's a really long title with the Curse of the Black Pearl bit. But they were originally going to call it Pirates of the Caribbean, but then they thought, well, it might have sequels, and they were obviously right. So that's why the whole Curse of the Black Pearl bit was added on.
Yeah, which is such an interesting tidbit, because I remember hearing because I only noticed sequels or movies recently do the movie title, whatever, right? Like that whole titling thing recently. And I heard that that's because maybe they've done some research that they don't like naming movies like Pirates 2, Pirates 3, because it apparently, according to the research they've done, it makes people feel overwhelmed, like, oh, great, now I have to watch all these other movies. And so the idea is like, oh, let's name it instead of number it so that people won't feel as overwhelmed. But I was like, how does that work? Like, it still is a lot of movies if you haven't watched it. But I didn't realize that was an idea even in 2003. I thought that was more of a recent occurrence.
No.
Like, oh, we want to have sequels, so let's not just call it Pirates of the Caribbean because we don't want to make the next one Pirates of the Caribbean 2. Let's name it Pirates of the Caribbean Curse of... I just didn't know that was a thing.
No, to be honest, I always thought it was a bit more of a recent thing, but I've always kind of questioned, like, how do they come to the decision of, are we going to call it... Like, for example, Marvel Studios is a great example because they've got Iron Man, Iron Man 2, Iron Man 3. And you're like, well, okay. So is that your naming convention? And they're like, actually, no, because then we're going to bring out Thor the Dark World, and Thor Ragnarok. And it's like, who makes the decision? Like, why is it not Thor 2, Thor 3? Or why is it not Iron Man, even more iron, and
exactly.
Iron Man,
like, super iron,
suffering from PTSD. I mean,
I
don't understand, like, how do they make the decision? Because obviously there's no clear template when you look at something like Marvel Studios, because they mix and match, and it always feels a little bit like for example, I can fully imagine them doing, so obviously they've brought out Black Panther, and then I can imagine the next one is literally just going to be Black Panther 2. And
that's what I imagine too.
And that makes sense for Black Panther. But then you've got like Captain America, and it's not Captain America 2. And it's like, but how? Yeah. How do they make the decision? I find it very odd. Like, I don't know.
I had no idea. So like hearing you explain with the pirates element, like it's like, oh yeah, I guess it would have been a thing early on too. Like I didn't know that. Like, okay.
It's weird. Like how do they make the decision? And like obviously, like you say, they go on like what they think people want. But then it's like, how like why are Marvel Studios doing it differently then? Is it a decision that's made by the actual director of the movie? Is it something that Kevin Feige says, well, actually, I want Iron Man 2, Iron Man 3, but I don't want that for Thor. And like, but like, why?
That specific example is the weirdest because they're so inconsistent. So it really doesn't make any sense. But also, you would think they would,
because the movies are so linked as well in this whole kind of MCU universe, which I know that doesn't make sense because I'm essentially repeating universe twice. But the whole kind of, they were quite interlinked even in kind of phase 1. And I mean, I don't know whether they were kind of like, well, because phase 1 had Iron Man and Iron Man 2, and then when it came to phase 2 they were like, well, actually we'll carry on with Iron Man, but then we'll do something different for Captain America and Thor and whatever. I'm not sure, but I can't imagine the next Black Panther movie will be Black Panther straight out of Wakanda, or
I mean, maybe that would be cool. I would be like, like, so I don't know what they're gonna do.
I don't know, that just popped into my head. I don't even know where that came from. But if they do call it Black Panther straight out of Wakanda, then you heard it here first.
They're listening and they're like, oh, great title.
So at this point, obviously we've talked quite a lot about certain sort of plot points in the movie, but obviously I'm mindful of the time. So I kind of feel like going through kind of each plot point I think it might take a little bit too long.
This movie itself is 2 hours and I think 20 something minutes, so it is a longer movie. So going through each thing might be a little time consuming.
So I thought maybe we could just kind of pick out some like favorite sort of plot points, kind of sort of going down, because obviously I kind of watched the movie and I sent you through sort of my thoughts on different kind of points in the movie, and to be fair, it's all bullet pointed and it's quite long because I don't do short things, obviously, but I kind of wanted to maybe start with the sort of Jack's iconic entry into port with the sinking ship.
It is such a cool moment, and I think such a good character building moment, because at this point in the film, we haven't heard Jack Sparrow speak. We know nothing about Jack Sparrow, but visually we can see, like, he comes in and it looks like, wow, really grand and majestic. The wind is blowing through his hair, and then it zooms out and you see that his ship is sinking. And you're like, okay, this is the type of person we're working with. Like he's carrying himself like really serious and like, okay, I'm doing well, but his boat is literally underwater. And I just think that's like, okay, I kind of know what I'm getting into a little bit with Jack Sparrow. And then, of course, like I think salutes the skeletons that are hanging. And then, so that establishes like, okay, he might be in danger. He's a pirate, and they kill pirates. And then the timing of the boat completely sinking and him stepping foot onto the dock is like perfect and comes off really cool. And it's like, even before he's said one word, you're like, is he the coolest character ever?
Yeah.
You're just like, you know, like it just establishes so much in like that 20 seconds. I wrote that down in my notes as well, just wanting to discuss it, just because I remember when I saw the film, I was just like, who is Jack Sparrow? Like, what? Okay.
Yeah.
Like, just like, this is really, really cool. I don't want to equate this completely to how people feel about, like, you know, when they saw the original Star Wars, because I like Star Wars, but I'm not nostalgic about it because I didn't see it until I was an adult.
Mm-hmm.
But seeing this movie, I felt like I saw things that I had never seen before, or at least never experienced it for me, that made me so excited to watch a movie. And I think really I can put this film as being one of the reasons why I started looking into actors' filmographies and learning more about film, because it was just so exciting and new to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, that entrance, I was just like, what? Like it just came off so cool, and such a great way to build his character.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I kind of feel like, I know we talked earlier about a reboot of the franchise, and I kind of feel like how, you know, even if you have a completely new character who's not related to Jack Sparrow in any way, how can you top this entrance? Because you can't. Like, how can you introduce a character without saying a single word? Like, he doesn't mention anything, but how do you summarize a character so well and make it humorous and make it slightly serious and give him that swagger and that confidence and everything that he kind of protrudes from this scene of, you think he's on a ship, you know, just a normal ship.
Yeah.
And then it, like you say, it pans out and it's sinking. And the fact it kind of sinks to the point where he can just glide off onto the
it looks like he's floating almost.
And I'm like, it's this whole lightning in a bottle thing. How can you do that again? How can you introduce a character so well without saying a single word? You can't. I mean, whoever came up with that idea, whether it was Johnny Depp or whether it was Gore Verbinski or whoever, to introduce this character, but it is a stroke of genius, because it, like you say, it tells you everything you need to know about Jack Sparrow.
Yeah, and then when the scene continues and it's the guy who like is like, hey, you have to pay to dock your ship, and you look and it's like literally underwater. It's like, I need your name and money, and he's like, well, how about I give you 3 times what you're asking me and you don't ask for my name? And it's like, ooh, mystery. Like, you know, like, it's just like every step of the way from then on, it's like, what's his deal? Like, there's so much to go with his character. Even like, I mean, we'll get to our favorite parts and I can mention it then, but there's just, every time he interacts with someone, I feel like you learn something new about him without him having to tell you who he is, right? Like, it's done very effortlessly, I feel.
I also feel as well with a character like Jack Sparrow is that you get a measure of him in this scene, but then because he only does something that kind of services himself in that situation, so he will be on whatever side is, you know, the right side for him to, it's like a sense of self-preservation. In that he will be on the bad side, he'll be on the good side, but whichever side he's on, it will be to continue his life, essentially, because he's that sort of guy. And I kind of feel like that obviously comes across more kind of as we kind of spend a bit more time with Jack going forward, but it certainly sets him up as being a bit of a scoundrel. The fact that he's like, well, you don't need my name. They just kind of let him do it because they've got the money, and they just call him Mr. Smith, and then he just kind of steals the purse at the end anyway. So.
Yes, and so it's just like, oh, okay, yeah, I know this person. I'm learning more about him. Not only did he not give his information because he's trying to remain mysterious, but now he just straight up is stealing immediately. He just got here and he's already stolen something. You know, like. Yeah.
Obviously, like I say, I don't want to go through kind of all of the plot points because we've already talked about when he saves Elizabeth, who obviously kind of, she is feeling faint because she's wearing this stupid dress that her father has kind of made her wear. And she essentially kind of falls into the water, and Jack sees and rescues her. But he obviously rescues her, that he sees this girl kind of fall into the water, and he's the only one because no one else is willing to save her. And then he obviously realizes who she is and that he can get something out of the situation. And then obviously we talked about their specific sexual tension earlier
in that moment.
That moment, but obviously at that point she's already, because she's wearing Will's necklace, she accidentally summons the ship. There's that little blast that kind of goes through the water, and we've talked already about the choreography between Jack and Will when they kind of do a little spar, but I kind of wanted to focus on what I think is actually a really brutal scene. I know we've talked about the fact it's a Disney movie, but when the Black Pearl actually arrives and the pirates attack Port Royal, it's quite shockingly brutal.
It really is.
For a kids movie. Essentially, what is a kids movie?
Yeah. When they finally arrive to her home, and I guess the butler doesn't know what's going on outside, and he calmly opens the door.
Yeah. And
we don't see the actual shot, but we see her reaction, and then we see him on the ground. It's very jarring. Yeah. I think if you're too young to watch it, but it is like, whoa, like, okay, we're just straight up killing people, right? Like they came here to like mess some stuff up, and they are not joking around. So when that moment happened, I remember being like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that, for me at least as a young teenager, you know. But yeah, that whole moment, I also like that scene. To speak of like the choreography or how things are laid out, I also like when she is fighting off one of the pirates with that like heated, I don't know what it would be called, but like it's not a bedpan, but it has like coal in it.
Yeah, they used to put like coal in it, and it was like an old version of like a heated blanket, I think. So they'd put it under the blankets, and I mean, quite dangerous now. Obviously, a bit of a fire hazard.
Yeah, but like I think they do such a good job because they establish that they're putting it in there. Her maid is helping her. That's there, but then she obviously uses it as a weapon very quickly later, or at least when they come into her room. And I just like that moment because she like tries to hit them, then he grabs it, then she releases the coal and it falls, and it all makes sense. Yeah. Even though that's something that I was not familiar with, like I don't know what that thing is. But like the way that they establish it, it's like, oh, this is perfect planning. You not only use this thing, but you established it beforehand so we could understand what it was and all that stuff. I just really liked that moment.
I always find it's really good when movies kind of call back to certain things that are a bit earlier on, because often in movies, something's just there. It's like a bit of a MacGuffin. It's like, oh, they've got a magical sword that will magically fix this, and it's all of a sudden here, and it's like, but actually if they'd introduced it at the start of the movie, it would actually make sense for the magical sword to be there. So I kind of like that this movie does that really well. It kind of plants these little seeds of, well, this is here and that's here, and it almost kind of traces it like a bit of a puzzle to kind of eventually get there. I kind of mentioned in my notes the whole Ello poppet line it's still so spooky because you just see like his face kind of come into the gap between the doors, and it's obviously we know then that she's been captured, but it's so well done. It's almost like it's not like a horror movie, but it feels, the tension is really good.
I think it is kind of like a horror movie. It is terrifying, you know. If someone came into your home, you would probably try to barricade yourself, and then the moment they see you, you're like, I'm screwed. This is like, I cannot escape. Great. You know, like it's terrifying. It's obviously a bit more comical because they have these kind of like goofy pirates, and one has the wooden eye and the other one just kind of funny. They have a funny banter between them. But it is really scary.
Yeah, because they say, don't they? They were like, the gold calls to us. And it's like, then you understand, because obviously we know she has the necklace. The necklace called out to them. And then it's like, then you understand why they're there, because they're following the gold. And in a lot of movies, characters just appear somewhere for no reason. And then you're like, but why are they there? But it makes complete sense because the gold is calling to them. They know exactly where she is.
Exactly.
And that kind of makes it a bit more frightening in the sense that she literally has nowhere to hide because they will always find wherever she is. So
exactly. And even like her wearing the necklace, because I think even when I was younger, I was like, why was she even wearing it? But again, I feel like it's just to establish like she is interested in pirates. Like clearly she's been studying pirates. I don't know, like she knows about pirate code. Like she is fascinated by this world, so she would wear the necklace because it's something that she finds interesting and more exciting than maybe the life that she's currently living.
I mean, so I did make a note that with the whole pirate code, like I understand that she's interested in pirates. I do kind of feel it's a little bit far-fetched that she would know the ins and outs of the pirate code to the degree that, like the parlay, that she would know about parlay and that, so for me that kind of felt a little bit like, well, I'll kind of give it a pass because it's the only way that she can kind of get out of the situation. But I'm not entirely positive that she would ever, because it's not, obviously she's educated. She's a very wealthy young woman, so she will have access to books and stuff like that. But I don't think it would ever be anything, considering piracy is such a crime, that she would ever really have access to. So she would probably just know stories or, shanty tales or something like that. So I'm always, I question that a little bit, but I don't question it in to the degree that I'm like, well, this is completely ridiculous. Like, how does she know? Because it's the only way that the movie can kind of progress with her. So and I think I was kind of like, well, Norrington seems to know a lot about pirates. I mean, it's his job to protect where they live, and he has to be educated on that, right? But I kind of felt like, well, whatever he's doing to be knowledgeable about it, maybe she has access to. I don't know. I kind of just gave that some leeway. I just kind of assumed, like, okay, well, maybe she is educated because she has the same access that Norrington has to protect the town. Yeah. At this point, Jack has been imprisoned, and we find out about the curse because there's that great scene where they their hand kind of leans in sort of under the moonlight through the bars. Oh, my God. Such an awesome scene. Oh my God. Like, because it comes out of nowhere. Are annoyed with me. Yeah, it comes out of nowhere. And again, 29-year-old me and 13-year-old me was like, what? Like, it's just like such a shocking moment and so exciting that when they do that, because I definitely was not expecting that when I first watched the movie. I was like, wait, what? I was trying to remember also, like, if that was revealed in the trailer at all, which I don't really remember if it was, but I just remember that being such a shocking moment. I don't think it was. I was not expecting that. I don't think it was. I was completely surprised, and I was like, what is happening to this guy's arm? Like, what? And then Jack Sparrow was like, oh, so there is a curse. And you're like, oh, okay, tell me more. Yeah. Like, it goes on from there. But that moment is fantastic. And I just wanted to specifically mention the actually we didn't talk earlier about the chemistry between Elizabeth and Barbossa, but I think that they've got some really great chemistry as well, because as I mentioned, he's a bad guy. He says this incredible line, which is a line that I actually say quite a lot, which is, I'm excited to hear which it. Is if someone asks me to do something that I don't want to do, I will say that I'm disinclined to acquiesce to your request. Because why are we the same person? I don't know. So okay. When I first watched this movie, and then the several times when I rewatched it, that was the moment where I was like, well, I need to get up to this point before I go to bed, at least. Like, I need to get to that line. And that whole scene is so awesome because I think Elizabeth says something to him, and he's like, we can't understand those long, flowery words or whatever. And then they have this back and forth, and then she's like, well, let me go. And then that's when he says,
I'm disinclined to acquiesce to your request. And then she looks at him puzzled, and he's like, means no. And I'm just like, ooh, snap. Again, maybe I'm painting a picture of how like dorky I was then and now. But for me, I was just like, oh my gosh, such a great line. I didn't understand like those words because I had never really heard anyone speak like that before. So when it happened, I was like, wow, that's like so perfect. His delivery is amazing.
It really is.
It's one of my favorite lines in the film, and I'm so happy to hear that you're not the only, or at least I'm not the only person who was obsessed with that specific line, because it's so perfect and so like wordy, but like it flows very well. I'll stop talking about it because I just love that line so much.
No, it's so good.
It's just amazing how there are movies like Pirates of the Caribbean that could have like either a line or maybe even a word, like learning a new word, or a line delivery that connects with you so much that you're like, well, clearly this is now part of me and part of my life, and I need to now use this for the rest of my life. Like, this is what I'm going to be doing.
It's quite amazing that, you know, that a movie can teach you that sort of thing, and like you say, that it stays with you literally for the rest of your life. And that's I think Barbossa does have some of the best lines, and I think Jack does have some great lines, and I think a lot of them were probably ad-libbed by Johnny Depp, possibly. I think from kind of just lines and just general delivery, I think that Barbossa is just spot on, because he's the one who says, you know, you'd better start believing in ghost stories, Miss Turner. You know, you're in one. And then you get that wonderful reveal of his cursed face. And I'm just like, boom, money shot. There you go. That's it.
Yeah, that is like the moment I was like, is this the greatest film in the world? Okay. So I wrote down the entire speech. I'll try to read it really quickly.
Okay.
Because I feel like it's so good. Obviously, I'm not going to deliver it as well as him. But he says, the moonlight shows us for what we really are. We're not among the living, and so we cannot die. But neither are we dead. For too long, I've been parched for thirst and unable to quench it. Too long, I've been starving to death and haven't died. I feel nothing. Not the wind on my face, or the spray of the sea, nor the warmth of a woman's flesh. And then that's when he goes into, you best start believing in ghost stories, Miss Turner. You're in one. And as I'm reading this, I'm hearing him say it, and I have goosebumps. Yeah. And it's literally such a good moment, because that's when she stabs him. They have that dinner, and she stabs him because she wants to get away from him. And that's a moment where they reveal all the blood on the knife. That's, I think, looks really cool. Mm-hmm. And she leaves and sees all the crewmen who are in the moonlight, so that she could see all their bones. And so it's this kind of like her screaming and running around and stuff. And then this line is delivered, and it's just like those like 3 minutes of that whole moment, I think, are like the peak of the movie, in my opinion. Like, where you're just like, oh my gosh, she does not know what she just got herself into. And this curse is not just like, whatever, we're cursed for this. It's like, no, like the idea of not being able to die might seem good to some people. However, he describes in those lines like how they've been living, but they're not really alive, and they can't really experience anything. So eating is not really satisfying them. They can't really feel like how they used to. So it's almost like, it's not that they want to die, but they want to be truly alive. Yeah. And obviously eventually be able to die like a normal human being.
Yeah, it's quite good though, because it actually humanizes the characters in a really weird way, because you actually kind of start to feel a bit sorry for them. And it's
absolutely,
and that's an interesting angle to take when you're talking about pirates, because like I said, pirates are essentially the bad guys, and these are the bad guys. And yet knowing that they can't quench their thirst, that, you know, food turns to ash in their mouths, etc., you kind of think, actually, I feel sorry for these people now. And then you have that wonderful shot of Barbossa in the moonlight, kind of when he takes a drink, and it kind of just splashes down his bones. Yes. And I'm just like, that is such a great shot. And I mentioned, obviously we're going to talk a little bit about the effects and everything kind of as we go along, but the effects in this movie, on the most part, still hold up. Like, they still look so fantastic.
I agree with you. And I always wonder, like, whenever they would, like, remaster a movie or whatever, why they don't do it with something like this. Because, like, I think the effects, like, in 2019 are pretty good. But, like, you know, we have seen super realistic things currently.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, oh, I wonder if they had the access to the tools that are available now, what that would look like in that film. And it's like, I'm not always, I don't want to always encourage, like, oh, you should update your films or whatever. But I am interested to see, like, if they were to update the technology used in these scenes, specifically when the moonlight hits them,
mm-hmm.
how realistic it would be. Because I feel like it would be even scarier because it'd probably be so realistic looking.
Yeah.
But I do agree that I think the effects still work. I don't remember really any scenes where it didn't work for me today. Maybe like the monkey at certain times when it was in the moonlight. But otherwise, I really enjoyed it. But I would be interested to see, like, if they updated it. I know they won't, but if they were to do that, like, what it would look like.
Yeah, I think, you know, when we're talking about the effects and everything, like you say, I think that's why I kind of said that not all of the effects kind of work so well, because I was going to specifically mention the monkey, because I think I think the monkey, when it's a real monkey, I think it works really well. And I'm not sure when it's like because it's obviously a CGI monkey or something. I know that when they did the effects for the Cursed Pirates, they kept the characters' real eyes, which I find completely fascinating, that they obviously kept the eyes, but then kind of CGI'd the rest of the bodies, which I think still looks very effective. And there are some specific scenes where I'm just like, wow, this looks so damn good. Like, it's hard to believe that this movie was like, it's 16 years old. It's like, what? I mean, obviously we've talked about Elizabeth dining with Barbossa, and I think just before then, Will actually learns about his father being a pirate, and Jack also mentions that he's a pirate and a good man, which again is something that is called back sort of later on in the movie, that you can be a pirate and a good man, which I really kind of like. And it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, that it sows all these little seeds throughout the movie and then it pays them off later, which I really like. Obviously, I'm going to mention just briefly when Jack is recruiting sailors, or essentially ex-pirates, to join him. We have like a lineup, and one of them is Zoe Saldana, who has obviously gone on to much bigger and better things sort of following this movie, because she didn't return for any of the others. And I read a really interesting quote from her. I don't have it in front of me, but it basically said in a nutshell that her experience of working on this movie was really bad. That she wasn't happy with certain people higher up in the chain. That she didn't have a problem with any of her fellow actors, but that she felt that she was mistreated and sort of undermined on set, which is really sad, because I think she was quite young. I think she was only sort of early 20s when she made this film.
I read the same thing. I was kind of reading up on it as well. And I think she was 23. And I think her main point was, like, the actors were great, but the way that they had their system, there was like a hierarchy that if you were lower, you were treated poorly. Therefore, she's like a new actor who, you know, has a small part in this movie. I think she's implying that she was treated badly because she was considered to be lower to maybe the people in production. I'm not quite, she obviously didn't specify who was doing this, but my assumption is, and she didn't mention the director, but it implies who else would be higher up than the director. Like, I don't know who exactly she's pinpointing, but it sounds like the environment, if you were a person who was not top of the call sheet, maybe you weren't treated as nicely. Especially also, I think she reflected that it was one of her first acting jobs. or at least early on in her career. So she was debating after that experience quitting.
Yeah.
Because it was so bad.
Yeah. And
so, yeah, that's really unfortunate.
And it's quite interesting because obviously her character, Anna Maria, is kind of introduced as being like this feisty pirate who's been wronged by Jack Sparrow, and he promises her a ship. And and then obviously Will then comes in and says specifically that ship. So then Jack has to kind of agree, that ship. But then, and I don't know whether this was a result of obviously the issues on set or whatever, but she's pretty much kind of not in the movie really much after that. You see her in a couple of scenes, and then you see her at the end, and she's like, "Oh, Captain,
here's your ship."
Yeah, here's your ship.
Yeah.
And I'm like, where was the feisty Anna Maria that we saw at the start? Like,
yeah, I agree. I feel like, so I'll say for me, in case anyone is listening to this who doesn't know, I am Black. So when I saw this movie, I was like, great. When she showed up, I was like, what? There's a Black woman in this movie? Like, because I honestly was not used to seeing that in big budget films. So I was really excited to see someone who looked like me in a film that was like, I was already like all for and really excited about. Obviously the movie is not about her, so I wasn't expecting it to then focus on her. However, I do feel like her character was introduced as one thing and ended as another. And like you said, who knows what the reasons for that may be, but it was a bit disappointing watching it today. Because I think at 13 I was like, oh, great, like there's someone who looks like me in this movie. But then when I'm watching it today, I'm like, oh, that's weird that she seems to be like, okay, Captain Jack Sparrow, here's your boat. Because I feel like her character would be like, okay, I know that other boat is all messed up, but you still owe me a boat.
exactly. Yeah.
Like, I feel like she'd be like, okay, so I'm gonna be here, but you need to like still you promised me a boat, so that's the only reason why I'm here.
Yeah.
That I would have liked to have seen that from her character, but yeah, it's disappointing. I am very curious what happened on set. I'm sure she will never reveal the specifics, especially since it's been so long.
And like I say, she's gone on to bigger and better things anyway. So I'm sure it's sort of no skin off her bones that she obviously had this experience. She's moved on, and she's obviously now essentially a massive star in her own right. So.
Zoe Saldana is an interesting actress because I feel like her most famous parts are her in makeup, which is interesting.
Yeah.
I think I feel like people know what she looks like, but I could see somebody not knowing because Avatar and Gamora in Avengers, she is painted up. So I could see someone being like, oh, that's what she looks like, because most of the time she's under a lot of makeup and prosthetics.
Yeah. I think the only kind of big movie she was in where she wasn't was the Star Trek reboots. So, you know, they did the 3 Star Trek movies.
That's true.
But yeah, otherwise, she pretty much has been covered in makeup for the majority of her career. Which is
that's a whole other conversation that we could obviously have at a different time. Yeah. But I noticed that a lot with like a lot of Black actors in sci-fi movies. It seems like that is a go-to to put them in some type of prosthetic or makeup. And at least when they're starring. So yeah, that's a whole other thing. But as far as Zoe Saldana in this film, I was just really excited to see her when I was 13. And I thought that was really cool that she was in this movie and that she was kind of like this tough character. I think we saw him interact with other women who like slapped him and stuff, but we didn't really get to know anything else about them. With her character, it kind of seemed like, oh, is she a pirate herself? Why she wants to be part of this crew, you know? Yeah. But yeah, it was nice to see her, and yeah, I wish her character was a tiny bit more developed, but you know, it wasn't something I noticed back then, but something that was very obvious now. Yeah.
There's a specific shot in the movie where it's kind of underwater and it's looking up sort of through the shipwrecks with the sort of hammerhead sharks, and there's like a load of sharks that are kind of sort of swimming through these shipwrecks, and I just think, I mean, that shot is probably one of my favourite shots in the movie because it looks awesome. It's so cool. You've kind of got the danger element of these sharks, and then you've got like the sort of this sad element of all of these ships that have obviously been sunk in these waters sort of over time, and it's very spooky. And yeah, I still don't know where it was filmed. I assume it was filmed in one of the locations I mentioned before, but obviously that's a real kind of ship graveyard somewhere. But it may be CGI, but it doesn't look it. It looks like a genuine sort of ship graveyard.
Regarding that scene, or at least a scene similar, when all the pirates are walking under the water.
Oh, I love that.
And I really liked that, you know, they're walking under something. So at one point there's no moonlight, and then they walk forward and there's moonlight hitting them. So you see them kind of turn into and back out of being human, and then their skeleton, and back and forth. I just really like that moment, especially because it's like they're walking in slow motion because they're underwater, and it just looks really cool.
It looks so good. I've actually just found the thing on the list that I wanted to talk about. So I wanted to just kind of mention, because at this point we don't know anything about sort of Jack's history. We know that he used to be the captain of the Black Pearl, but we don't know kind of what happened. And then Joshua Gibbs, who's essentially like the first mate, sort of tells Will about the whole mutiny, and that Barbossa kind of took command of the ship, and they left him on an island to go mad, and they gave him a gun with a single bullet, because obviously that gun with a single bullet is going to come back later. Because I think specifically Jack mentions, I can't remember exactly to which character, but he says something like, "This shot's not for you."
I think it's to Will Turner when they're having their sword fight.
It is, because he specifically wants that bullet to be for someone. And when they're talking, one of the best lines is about sea turtles, and the fact that there's this sort of story that how he got off the island was he took two sea turtles and he roped them together and then basically rode them. And then so Will asks, like, what did he use for rope? And then Captain Jack basically comes in and says, "Human hair from my back." I think it was ad-libbed, because if you look at Joshua Gibbs's face, he is grinning so hard. So I think it was ad-libbed, because the other actor's reaction is of genuine surprise. So
that's funny.
But essentially, at this point, the pirates have Elizabeth, and they believe that she is the child of Bootstrap Bill Turner. And so they basically say, well, we've got to take the gold back to this cave where we stole it from in order to return it and break the curse, and we have to give a blood sacrifice. And she obviously thinks that they're just going to kill her, because they don't kind of tell her otherwise. And Jack and Will kind of then get to the cave, and it's really cool because they're kind of creeping up to sort of everyone in the cave. It's a little bit reminiscent of the second Indiana Jones movie, where they're kind of watching from afar, and Will knocks Jack out so that obviously he can try and save Elizabeth. And then we get the scene where...
And he's suspicious of Jack
as
well.
I mean, who you would be, because... The guy is a pirate, so and Jack does mention that a couple of times. He's like, duh, pirate, And then they kind of Barbossa does the whole cut of the palm, which I always think is really stupid, because surely that's a ridiculous place to cut someone to get blood. I mean, not that I've tried, but do you not think, like, why what is it with palm cutting in movies? Like, if you need blood, they always cut the palm. And I'm like,
I don't know.
I mean, it's obviously great effect. He basically clasps her hand over the medallion to put the blood on it, and then just kind of drops it into where the rest of the gold pieces are, because they think obviously it's the right person's blood. And then the best part is how they figure out whether it's worked or not. And Barbossa just gets his gun and shoots someone.
Yes, and you see the bullet hit him, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
How it's shot. You like see the impact, which you wouldn't see in a film like this. Or at least a Disney film. Yeah. And that is really funny. And then, because he's like, Yeah,
they're like, did it work? How do we tell? And then it's shoot, and it's like, you're not dead. And they obviously then realise, because Barbossa's like, are you the child of Bootstrap Bill Turner? And she's like, actually, I'm not. And the one thing I will kind of point out is that Elizabeth, this isn't the first time she gets slapped in the face. And I kind of have a bit of an issue with the fact that she is slapped hard enough to kind of knock her to the ground. So that's not a small slap. That's a proper whack. If you're hitting someone with so much force, I mean, okay, she's a young woman, and she's a slight young woman. But still, that level of violence from essentially this big, massive pirate man on this small 18-year-old woman with such force that she kind of falls down onto a ledge, I kind of feel is a little bit excessive.
You know, I hear what you're saying, and I definitely could understand that perspective. For me, I felt like it was building. Obviously, it's upsetting to see someone do that, right? But as far as Barbossa as the character he is, like you mentioned earlier, when he's talking about the curse that they had, you almost sympathize with him. You're like, oh, maybe he's not so bad. And then he does that, and you're like, no, he's a bad guy.
Yeah.
You know, like, this isn't a good person. And so, you know, the violence that she experiences, which I think is getting slapped by him both times, or maybe another pirate.
I think another pirate does it. Pirate. Yeah, another pirate does it the first time, and he steps in, and he's like, "You don't treat a woman this way."
Yes, and then he himself does it. I think builds on who he is, where I don't think he probably really values women that much beyond maybe a physical thing. You know. So yeah, I felt like the violence against her was to build how they view women. Is it a pretty sight to see? No, absolutely not. It's not something I enjoy seeing. However, I felt like, okay, I understand why they're doing this to build this character. It didn't feel cheap to me, which sometimes I think certain things like this could feel cheap.
Yeah, I do appreciate what you're saying when we're talking about the character of Barbossa, in that I think he is obviously very angry at this point and frustrated that he thought this person was kind of the answer to the curse, and it turns out that she's not. And I do agree to the point that obviously, in a sense, it's calling back to the previous where he stopped. You know, we didn't stop, but he was like, "You don't treat women like that," kind of thing, when he was trying to be nice to her. And now it's kind of a reversal of that. But I do kind of feel like he could have just. I mean, I guess it's kind of no better, but he could have maybe just pushed her, or
shoved her off.
I mean, it's kind of not better, but it's not a slap in the face. But I suppose she, in a way, she kind of needed to be knocked out so that it kind of took her out of the equation, so that then he didn't kind of worry about her, because at that point Will kind of emerges from the water and she awakes and he rescues her. And I think if she was still conscious and talking, and Barbossa would be focused on her.
Possibly,
so,
yeah.
So from that point of view, I'm like, I mean, it's not the greatest. I think it could have been done differently, but I do appreciate what you're saying about the character of Barbossa and the fact that, he is a bad guy, so he probably is going to do something like that.
There's the whole, there shouldn't be a woman in the crew, women are bad luck. So there's already a weird view of women in general, and I'm assuming based off of his actions, Barbossa probably doesn't think very highly of women, including the other pirates.
Obviously at this point Jack has awoken from being knocked out, and he then gets captured, and he has this wonderful, because he can't remember the parley, and so he goes through all of these words that include parsnip, parsley, and then one of the pirates says parley, and he's like, yes, parley, and again, I don't know if that was ad-libbed, but it feels like it was, but it's one of those where I'm not sure whether he is sticking to the script or not, but if he's not, it's almost seamless, because you can never tell whether he's ad-libbing or whether he's going from the script, because he's that good in this movie that he could literally be saying anything that pops into his head, or he could be reading off a script and you have no idea. At this point, obviously, Jack's fallen behind, and he basically tells Barbossa that he knows who they need. And it's obviously Will.
Yeah.
Elizabeth basically tells Will, once they get back to the ship, that she had his necklace. I think he overreacts a little bit when he's like, well, why did you take it? Kind of thing. And I think she's justified in that, well, A, she was a young child, and B, if her father and the Commodore knew that that boy was a pirate, they probably would have killed him.
Yeah, exactly.
Or at least put him in prison as a young boy. And so I kind of feel like she did the right thing for Will in sort of taking it. But I do kind of agree that why did she not give it back sooner? Like, she's been keeping it as like a weird memento. And that kind of, it goes back earlier to, okay, well, why does she love Will Turner so much? And it's like, well, we're not sure, but she's kept this weird medallion as a memento of their first meeting. And she puts it on like a random day for some random reason. And that is a bit weird, but I do kind of think that Will overreacts a little bit in kind of berating her for her decision.
Again, his character seems to be the least developed as far as the main characters go.
Yeah, agreed.
And I think what they were trying to establish is that he obviously knew something was connected to a pirate in his life. Like, either he, like someone he knew, and he knew his dad gave him that. So he probably always knew, but rejected it. So then getting like the confirmation back probably was upsetting for him, since it's something he tried so hard to like leave out of his life. Yeah. So it's like, okay, that's understandable. You would be really upset. But like, it doesn't entirely work, because again, we as the audience are never really 100% like interested in Will, Yeah. So it's kind of like, okay, yeah, you're upset, but like, dude, like, like it doesn't feel like what I think they wanted it to feel like. Yeah.
And I do kind of feel like maybe someone like Heath Ledger would have been better in that circumstance.
Possibly,
but we're never ever going to know. So we just kind of have to take what we're given, and he looks pretty. So let's just continue to like give him lovely glances.
And I don't think he's bad, because he definitely could have been bad, and he could have been like a letdown, right? But I think he's fine. It's just that whenever we have to like stay on him for like any emotional thing, like him being upset about learning that his dad's a pirate and blah blah blah, it just doesn't work as much as everything else in this film.
Yeah, I completely agree. I just wanted to call back actually to my previous episode, which was on Speed, and there's a reason why I want to call back on Speed, because we're in a situation where the Interceptor, which is basically the fastest ship in the Royal Navy, Will and Elizabeth are on the Interceptor. And the Black Pearl is obviously essentially the fastest ship in the world, we're told, early on in the film. And that's where Jack and Barbossa and the rest of the pirates. And essentially we have a chase, which contains two ships. And I just specifically want to mention Speed, because Speed has a sequel called Speed 2 Cruise Control, which is set on a ship. And it's the most boring ship in the world. And when we're talking about, Speed as a movie is great with its really intense kind of chase scenes, on the freeway and with this bus. And it really ramps up the tension. And when you're talking about ships, which don't specifically go very fast, you kind of think, well, how are they going to make this tense? But somehow they managed to make this ship chase really tense. And
it's really tense.
It's done so well, because you see the Black Pearl kind of, gaining, just slowly kind of gaining. And they're like, well, the Interceptor is the fastest of the Royal Navy. Like, we need to lessen the load, we need to chuck stuff off to try and get faster. And it's one of the reasons I love it so much is the fact that when they realise it's too late, and they basically start loading the guns with cutlery and, anything to try and help themselves, because they know that the Pearl's going to catch them and the pirates are going to get them. Yeah. And it's Elizabeth who actually has the idea to lower the starboard anchor. which essentially turns the ship around so that they're in the right position to kind of fire the cannons, which there's quite a few occasions in this movie where Elizabeth has the really smart ideas. And this is a really smart idea from her because there's no way they can outrun them. They know that. So the only option they have is essentially to turn the ship around. And it's her that has the decision. And to be fair to the rest of the people on the ship, it's essentially a Royal Navy ship. So, you know, packed with naval officers, they listen to her and they turn the ship around. And it's so great, not only that they take Elizabeth's opinion on board and they realise it's the best decision. It's the only way they're going to actually stand a chance against these pirates is to fight them. They can't fight them with the position that they're in, so they have to turn. And the tension is so ramped up, and it's kind of like you're never going to get that feeling of speed in a movie that has ships, and yet it works with the tension. The fact that this ship is kind of slowly kind of catching up, and then the other ship kind of turns around really kind of violently. And honestly, this kind of battle with these two ships is the reason you go and see a pirate movie. It's to see the cannons and, you know, the gunfire between the two. And it's a really, really great scene. And
I agree.
And obviously we have to mention that the cannons kind of firing between the two ships is essentially what frees Jack, because he's basically in the prison of the Black Pearl, like underneath. Yeah, I can't even remember what the proper term is for it.
Yeah, I don't know what it's called.
In the cells, whatever. So yeah, he actually gets freed because of the cannon fire. It's so brilliantly done, because we know that the Interceptor doesn't stand a chance against a load of pirates. And it's so tense, and it's so wonderfully shot, and it's obviously all in the open water, and it's just like, sometimes I wonder, like, how do these movies that are set on water get made? Because it's obviously relatively deep water. It's obviously not on a soundstage somewhere. It's not set in a tank. It's out in the open ocean. So it amazes me so much.
Yeah, I wonder how they filmed all these scenes, because sometimes they'll do like a green screen with like a huge tank and stuff like that. I don't know how these scenes were specifically filmed, but to speak on like the energy that's in this film, I mean, I have not seen Speed 2.
Please don't. You don't need to.
Yeah. I assume that, you know, they were trying to rely on, like, okay, that bus was going really fast. Imagine if this boat was going really fast, but didn't really think it through.
Yeah.
That even as fast as a boat will go, when you have open water, you can't really, like, you have nothing to compare it to see how fast it's going. So it doesn't make sense when you're watching it. So like in this moment between the two ships, a lot of the tension isn't even just on the fact that you know that they're about to start like shooting cannons and stuff. It's more of like, what are we going to do? Okay, we need to start getting rid of stuff to go faster. Okay, that's not going to work. Okay, we need to turn around and put all the like forks and spoons and everything inside. And it's like panic. Yeah. And that makes the moment even more tense. And then, of course, then they start firing at each other, which is really interesting, because you're like, how is this going to end up? Like, they don't stand a chance. So, yeah, I think that's what really helped it with its intensity, and it made it really exciting. And I'm assuming Speed 2 does not have anything remotely close to that. I don't know.
It's an absolutely ridiculous movie. Don't watch it. Just watch Speed. It's so much better.
I've seen Speed, and I've heard about Speed 2, and the things I've heard about Speed 2 sound disappointing.
Yeah, it's not great. And sort of during this, we have basically the hunt is on for this medallion. The medallion it's the one thing that everyone's looking for. We find out the monkey is called Jack. And essentially the monkey takes the medallion. He sort of finds it on the Interceptor and takes it over to the Black Pearl. Or actually, it's the other way around, I think. Yeah. I'm just confused now of which ship they're actually on. But yeah, they've all kind of gone onto the Interceptor. Basically the whole of the ship is attacked, and the mast falls, and Will is trapped beneath deck, which is the phrase I was looking for earlier, beneath deck.
Oh, yes.
And,
okay.
and obviously it's flooding and he can't get out. They essentially rig it's the interceptor that he's under. So the interceptor is then rigged with a load of dynamite, and they capture all of the people, put them onto the Black Pearl, because that's the only functioning ship at this time. And the interceptor is blown up, presumably with Will in it. But as this is a Hollywood movie, he miraculously survives. Yeah. And he gets to the Black Pearl, and he basically does a deal with Barbossa for Elizabeth's freedom. And then Jack is basically like, don't do something stupid. And then he does the stupidest thing he can do and reveals that he's the child of Bootstrap Bill. And so now Barbossa knows what Jack was trying not to tell him. Or actually, we're not sure whether Jack was trying to tell him or not, but he implied to Barbossa that he was going to tell him. So he must have had a plan at some point what to do.
I think Jack knew, at least at that moment. It's like, don't tell them now, because that's not going to help me out, because they're not, like, I want to be able to reveal that to help me later. And
then we have a scene where Barbossa basically says that Elizabeth can go free, but Will didn't specify the terms of her freedom, and so she gets to walk the plank before returning the dress that he made her wear. And he makes Jack walk the plank before Jack basically says, well, last time you marooned me on this desert island, you gave me a pistol with one shot. And so Barbossa says, actually, I'll give you a pistol with one shot. And then Jack says, well, what about 2 shots? Because there's 2 of us. And Barbossa says, no, you can only have 1. And I just kind of mentioned in my notes that whoever does the stunts for Jack, their diving game is on point, because he dives. Look at him dive. He dives so spectacularly into the water.
I noticed that as well. I was like, wow, that's a really good dive.
It's so good. Like, it's a proper professional dive going on. But essentially, Elizabeth and Jack are now stranded on the same island that he was previously stranded on. And then we get some more excellent chemistry between them as they're drinking rum together.
This, again, another moment where I was like, they should end up together. Like, obviously. Like clearly there is so much tension between the two of them. And I had forgotten exactly what happened. So I was like, is she really drinking? Like, wow, she really just, like, it's just like, I give up. I'm just gonna, whatever. But obviously it was part of her plan to kind of get him really, really drunk so he could leave her alone while she started that fire. But when they're, like, running around the island and singing and all that stuff, and it's, like, really flirtatious. She's flirting with him and he's flirting with her. It's just, like, and their delivery as actors is very convincing, and way more chemistry and just a sexual tension than her and any scene with Will.
Like, just hands down. So, hands down. And I specifically love, again, Elizabeth proving that she is the brains. You know, the fact that she, you know, like you just said, she made him believe that she was drunk in order to get him super drunk so that he would go to sleep, and then she could start a massive fire. And her reasoning for doing so, because he famously says, you know, why is the rum gone? And she's like, it's a disgusting drink, and if I set fire to all these barrels, the Royal Navy is looking for me, they will find this massive plume of smoke. She is the brains behind this movie. She knows what she needs to do, and she executes what she needs to do, and she's completely fearless. And I have so much respect for Elizabeth Swann. More respect than I ever had on any previous watch.
I agree. It's really, they really establish her as being, like, she's able to think through, she's able to, like, figure things out, because I truly thought, oh my gosh, at this second, like, she doesn't know what to do, so she's just doing whatever Jack wants to do. And it's like, oh no, she has a plan. And she was right, because they obviously do see it and they do save her.
Yeah, because obviously, like you say, they do save her, and she actually begs Commodore Norrington to save Will, and she does it by agreeing to marry him. Which is a little bit kind of tropey. I think the whole kind of, if you do this, I'll marry you kind of thing. But I kind of understand it in the context of the movie that that's what he really wants. And that's kind of the only way to get what she wants. So I kind of feel like that's really smart because... So we find out, Will finds out that Barbossa killed his father, Bootstrap Bill, because he disagreed with their treatment of Jack, and because he sent his son this piece of treasure, which was cursed. And sending this child a piece of the treasure has essentially meant that they've all been cursed for the last sort of 8 years or so. And they essentially left him to drown, which sounds quite morbid, but if you think about it, Bootstrap Bill will also be in the same state. So he will just, we know sort of from the mythology of this film and ignoring kind of future films where we actually meet Bootstrap Bill, that he will be alive regardless because he can survive underwater. Yeah. So Jack agrees with Commodore Norrington that he will basically go into the cave and he will basically do the rescuing as long as sort of Norrington stays outside because Jack has this big master plan. And when he disturbs the ritual, because Barbossa's like, this is impossible. Like, I stranded you on an island with literally nothing. Yeah. And he's like, he's literally completely bewildered. And Jack makes sure to tell Will that Elizabeth is safe and that she's basically going to be marrying Norrington. And also, I kind of made a point saying that Jack is really the most self-preserving character. He literally does whatever is in his best interest at the time, and if it saves someone else, then so be it. So he doesn't kind of go out to save someone. He saves people because that's in his best interest at the time. So I kind of feel like he's that sort of character. Because he even says to Barbossa that if he kills Will and breaks the curse and they go out, then there's the massive naval fleet out there that is going to kill them. So he's using kind of his tricks to kind of then persuade Barbossa, well, actually, you don't want to be killing this young man because you're then going to walk out there and die. So, but if you want to do that, then you go ahead and do it. Because Jack's really good at telling people what they want to hear. So he basically says...
he's able to convince them.
Yeah. Oh, you can become Commodore Barbossa, and then I'll work for you. And Barbossa's like, we know how power hungry he is. He started a mutiny. And I kind of feel like the smartest characters in this movie are the ones that we don't expect, because we don't expect Jack to be as smart as he is, because he has this reputation for losing a ship. And Elizabeth, who's essentially a high society girl and the daughter of a governor. Like, you don't expect her to be intelligent. She's just a pretty rich girl. And I really like that the film kind of takes these characters and makes them as intelligent as they can possibly be in the situation that they're in. And this is the great scene, because obviously Barbossa agrees, and this is where we get that great scene of the pirates marching under the water to attack the ship. And they obviously climb the chains that are with the anchor, and it's so good. Like, it's really fantastic. This is
another terrifying scene.
Completely terrifying. When they attack the ship, and just before, you've got Governor Swan, who thinks he's talking to Elizabeth, and he basically says about, the whole, because I kind of wrote in my notes that most characters like this would just be happy that their daughter was marrying their choice of man, but he he knows why she's done it, and he knows it's to save Will, and he acknowledges that, and I think he is a great dad. He's not a great dad throughout the film, but I think he acknowledges that his daughter is doing it because she loves someone else. Why she loves someone else, we will never know, but because she should be loving Jack Sparrow, clearly. Not tell us that. And then we have the two comic relief pirates who are called Pintel and Ribetti, but I didn't know that until I researched it. Because
I didn't know their names.
I don't think their names are ever said. But yeah, they dress up as women and like row out on a little boat, and that's very funny. I mean, this movie is so damn good. Like,
it's so good, and it's able to do this stuff, like the scarier moments, like them climbing onto the boat, are shot in a way that's like it is really scary. Like, they're slowly climbing on the boats. They're killing people instantly. You're seeing a whole bunch of people just die who obviously were ambushed. They didn't know anything was happening. And at this point in the film, there's been so many awesome moments that you're just like, how is this going to end? Like, I remember when this part happened, I was like, I don't know what's going to happen, which is a rare feeling I have when I watch movies, because I feel like a lot of times they have like predictable plots. And I felt like in this film, I was just on the journey. I never knew what was going to happen next.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I know that I'm coming back to Elizabeth quite a lot, but I genuinely do think, I even wrote in my notes that I think she's the MVP. Like, I know that Jack Sparrow gets a lot of the credit, and he is great, but the only thing that I don't like from her, that like line-wise, is the whole try wearing a corset line.
I wrote that down. Yeah, I was like, ooh, I forgot about this line. This is, as much as I was saying I love the writing.
Yeah, it's such a bad line.
It's such a, like, we get it. The corset moment happened so long ago at this point that, like, you do not need to bring it back.
Yeah,
like,
it is. It feels like it feels like it's from a different movie. Like, it feels like Elizabeth would not say that.
Yeah, it's a little cheesy. When I watched it, I was like, oh, I forgot because they even zoom in on her after she like hits someone, and she says that, and it's like, this is not as epic of a moment as they think it is.
Yeah,
like...
yeah, it's supposed to be like the big girl power moment, but it just kind of falls really flat. And I think it's not Keira Knightley's fault. I think it's the line. Because
it's 100% the line. She does what she can with it, but at the end of the day, it's a crappy line.
Yeah, it is a really bad line. But so obviously we have some wonderful fight scenes in the cave with the patches of moonlight, and because at this point, obviously Jack has stolen some of the treasure, and he's now cursed as well. So you have the wonderful scenes between him and Barbossa in the cave where they're fighting each other, and they're going in between these patches of moonlight, and they're switching between sort of cursed, uncursed, cursed, uncursed. And it looks so great.
Yeah, it's really good.
Mean, I kind of feel like we are gushing about this movie, but there's very little to fault this movie on. It does have faults, definitely. But
I think we've pointed out its faults. Like, no movie is perfect, so like we have mentioned that, but overall this movie is freaking amazing, so like it's hard to not gush over it, you know? Like, it's just so much fun. And yeah, that moment where I think Barbossa like either stabs Jack or whatever, and Jack doesn't die, and he's kind of like, what? And that's when he reveals like, oh, I had to steal it. You know, it's me, Jack Sparrow, duh. And so, like, that moment's, like, great. And then also the fight that they have continuing where it's back and forth with them being skeletons and humans and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's just so exciting and so much fun, this dynamic they have between each other. And then the entire film itself has so many moments like that, yeah, I think it's really hard for me to, like, it's exciting the entire time. So it's just hard for me to ever think of like somebody not enjoying this film, you know, like even with its like tiny moments here and there that may not work, but like overall, so much of it does work.
Yeah, it really, really does. And we've got to the basic point at the end of the movie now. Elizabeth basically wants to know whose side Jack is on. We still don't know. No one knows whose side Jack is on. Jack is on Jack's side. And Jack basically bleeds onto the treasure. He throws it to Will. And you get this sort of moment with a shot firing out, and you think it's Barbossa shooting Will, but it's not. It's Jack shooting Barbossa. And then you get that amazing scene where you just kind of see this red kind of spread on his chest. And you realise that
him bleeding.
Barbossa is mortal. And so, obviously...
And he does another line that's amazing when he's like, I feel
I love that.
cold.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, oh my God, it's like almost heartbreaking because it's like he finally feels something, but it's his death.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh my God, this movie.
It's so good. I had that in my notes actually about his final line, because it is so, all he ever wanted was to feel. And now he feels, and it's the end. Obviously, spoiler alert, it's not the end because Barbossa comes back in the other movies. But in this point, to have his death, you think his death is final. So it means something in this movie that all he wanted was this one thing, and he's got it. And and then he's gone. But it also means that obviously all of the other pirates who are at this point fighting on the ship against the naval officers are also now mortal and are also susceptible to die. So they surrender because they're pirates and they're cowards, and that's what pirates do. You know, pirates don't do stuff because, you know, they do something if they're going to get gain out of it, and they'll surrender if they feel like they're not gonna kill themselves. Basically, they're gonna surrender. So also the curse has been lifted, and Will has a moment to tell Elizabeth, and he doesn't. And so at this point, Elizabeth knows that Jack is going to be hanged because he's pirate. And so we have a scene at Jack's hanging, where Will takes. So basically, this is another reason with Will, right? So he gets all dressed up with this really cool hat and everything, and Elizabeth is there with her new fiance, and he takes that opportunity to tell Elizabeth that he's in love with her at a hanging. And I'm like, dude,
Will doesn't know what he's doing.
Like, I'm like, time and place. If this is a somber event, this is a hanging, and your beloved is with her fiance, and you're gonna, and I'm like, what? Okay, but whatever. And then I put in my notes that Elizabeth is smart enough to fake fainting so that she distracts from Will, who's obviously going to try and save Jack. And then the escape is so good that I actually felt a little bit distressed when they got caught, because it was like, oh, come on, like, that was so good, and now they've been caught. Because all of the stunt work and everything in this film is so good. Like, I know it's probably completely fake that Jack Sparrow can swing and climb and do all these cool things,
like the actual ability of someone being able to do that, but it looks really cool and it feels real in the moment.
It looks so amazing. And then I kind of put a note at the end that obviously Elizabeth professes her love for Will, who's essentially now the associate of a pirate. So I did kind of feel like maybe Norrington would take it a little bit worse than just kind of say, oh, okay, well, you love him. Okay, then fine, bye.
He seems like a person who like wouldn't really. It seems like he probably went home and cried. He's trying to make sure, like, okay, I'm just like totally fine with this, whatever. But then he turns the corner and he starts sobbing, because I don't think he would let people see him get emotional.
Maybe, but
he seems very cold.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, no, I do see what you mean. But essentially, we've reached the end of the movie. Jack's the captain of the Pearl again, and he says the iconic line about, bring me that horizon. The end. We are finished.
The movie ends, the music swells,
so
and
good.
I think he's like, yo-ho, my pirates, yo-ho, or whatever he says at the end. And the movie ends, and you're just like, whoa! Like, it's just like such a, like, great feeling. It feels like, I can't believe I just, like, saw, like, the greatest movie, you know?
Yeah. It's so good.
And it's so good. And the music, I mention this sometimes on my podcast, like, I don't always observe the music as much in films. Like, I'm trying to be better at that. But in this film, like, that ending, the music kind of swells up. And it's just like, it kind of gets your heart racing a little bit. But then the movie ends, you're like, oh man, like, it's just a great ending.
It's so good. And it does end in such a way that, you know, it calls for a sequel kind of thing. It's set up in such a way that a sequel could, you know, obviously they didn't know if it was going to be successful. It shouldn't have been successful. It kind of went against all of the odds. And it was actually the fourth highest grossing movie of 2003. So it was massively successful. The only movies that were higher grossing were Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, Finding Nemo, and The Matrix Reloaded. So, so it's fourth highest grossing movie of that year. It's just a really, really phenomenal, enjoyable, wonderful movie. Like a proper movie, like the way movies are supposed to be.
Again, like I said at the beginning of this, I really feel like rewatching this recently has made me like I'm supposed to see movies this week, and I'm like, ugh, but they're not going to be like pirates. Like they're not going to, you know, like I'm kind of feeling a little like it's not going to be like as good, and I know it's not. And like
it's a bit depressing, isn't it? Like
I'm a little like I can't believe how good this movie is, and I wish the newer films that we're getting now were like this. And hopefully maybe they will be, or maybe I just need to go back and watch older movies, you know?
It's like it movies like this instill like a sense of wonderment and joy, and because like you say, when you've got this kind of score and it's building up, and you've like, I keep mentioning lightning in a bottle, but it does feel like this is lightning in a bottle. Like everything has come together so wonderfully on this movie, and it's a bit depressing that we had so many subpar sequels, and that and that Hollywood is so reliant on sequels, and a lot of them are just generally really rubbish. And you know, where is the originality in filmmaking? Because this is an original idea. Okay, it's based on a ride, but the idea for the movie is original, and the fact it's something so different and new, it really works.
Yeah, and I think earlier we were mentioning, you know, like this is a big blockbuster film, but like when you think about it, at the time of the release of this film, yes, it was a big blockbuster film, but the stars in the film, I'll speak specifically about Johnny Depp, weren't necessarily known to be box office draws. Like it wasn't like, okay, you put Johnny Depp in the lead of this multi-million-dollar film, people are going to go see it. You know, after this movie, I think that happened for him.
Definitely.
But but before this movie, so like it is rare because I can't think of many movies coming out like this summer that are big movies that aren't led by huge stars.
Yeah.
You know, like that is weird to like, or like that would be led by an indie star, like somebody who is like I can't think of anything at least for this summer, but I don't know, that it is very unique because again, Keira Knightley was relatively unknown, I guess internationally at least. I feel like Orlando Bloom probably would have been the biggest star at that moment, and even his part doesn't reflect that, because you would think if you have a big star, you would give them a big part. But the big part goes to Johnny Depp, you know? So it is really interesting to think about it at that time. Obviously now so much has happened with the sequels. I've only seen 3.
I think
I've only seen
me too.
Pirates of the Caribbean 3. I didn't see anything further. I have heard that maybe the recent one had some good moments here and there or whatever, but like there's nothing that is drawing me to actually go see those sequels.
No, me
especially
neither.
Knowing that like Johnny Depp as an actor seems to have really like gone into the deep end when it comes to this character.
Yeah.
When I was reading about some of the stuff when it came to this character, like something like he went to the dentist and he purposely put in gold teeth because he didn't think that Disney would let him have as many gold teeth in his mouth for the character, so he just did it at the dentist anyway, so they would have to deal with it. Or like makeup choices where they like made his scab bigger as the film progresses just for fun. Like it seemed like Johnny Depp was like going full force, like I am Jack Sparrow, like, you know. And I think probably in these later films, it probably got worse.
Yeah, I do feel very much that he cared about the role in 2003. And I think as progressively as time has gone on, I feel like it's a role that I don't think he cares about. I think it's just, to be honest, he sees it as a paycheck. And
probably,
I mean, I've not seen, like you say, the most recent ones. I think I might have seen a little bit of the 4th, but I think I switched it off because it was so terrible. When you see this Captain Jack and when you see one of the sequels, Captain Jack, it feels like a completely different character and a completely different actor. And there just feels like there's so much energy in this movie that's missing from his performance in the others. And I don't know why. I don't know if there's a reason. Like maybe he was contractually obliged, and so he felt like he had to do them. I'm not. I don't know. I really don't. But
yeah, the whole gossip with Johnny Depp. I mean, we've already mentioned that he's problematic, but I think he's also done interviews specifically where he's talked about how much wine he buys and how he has an island, and like, you know, obviously the amount of spending he's doing is a lot, so maybe that requires him doing these big movies so he could pay for his lifestyle. Like, I don't know.
Maybe.
But yeah, it is disappointing when you start to think about like the legacy of the franchise, but the film itself, this one film is perfect. I love it so much.
Good. It's so good. And just before we recorded, I always like to ask on social media for people's general comments and stuff like that. So I'm just going to run through a couple of comments. So I've got a comment from Instagram from Vegemorph, who said, an excellent, nostalgic, old-fashioned, swashbuckling classic with a unique spin in part thanks to Johnny Depp's Captain Jack Sparrow. Came out during the adventure/fantasy boom of the late 90s to early 2000s and reminded me of old classics like Captain Blood. Great stunts, story, effects and characters all around. I'm kind of in the minority on this, but after hearing about the cut material for his character, I feel really bad for Norrington. Now, I don't know what this cut material is, but I'm interested to find out. So I might find that out sort of after we record and maybe post about it on social media.
Like what material?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he had more stuff to do, or because Norrington doesn't really do much. But yeah, that might be interesting to investigate what that is specifically. But yeah. I'm not entirely sure. So on Twitter, I had quite a few. At Geek Salad Radio, Andy said, still possibly the best of the Walt Disney Studios live action films. It's such a fun roller coaster, ironic, and the best filmed representation of a Disney Parks attraction that holds the spirit of the ride. Which I think is generally kind of a really good summarisation of the last 3 hours and 15 minutes of this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Read his comment if you want to save time. Yeah, but otherwise.
Yeah. At Always Critic Pod said, first movie that ever warranted multiple rewatches while it was still in theatres. Intro to Keira Knightley, intro to Rum. And then Orlando Bloom, love heart eyes emojis always. I mean, we've been a little bit critical of Orlando Bloom, just generally, but I mean, the thing is when you're talking about a movie that's so perfect, something that's a little bit less perfect really stands out. And I kind of feel like that's where Orlando Bloom is. He's not terrible, but he stands out as being not as good as everyone else, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Like I mentioned before, they developed the other characters so well, and with his character, they just didn't do much with it. So, like, there wasn't much for him to do. So, like, he is kind of an afterthought, in my opinion. I'm like, oh yeah, Orlando Bloom's in this, but like, really, yeah, I think more about Johnny Depp and Keira Knightley.
Yeah, as do we all. At False Starts Pod said, saw this movie 4 times in the cinema, once with friends, once with family on holiday, once on my own on the same holiday. It was raining, I was bored. Once again when there was a free screening. Didn't get old, still holds up, a great movie, and it should have stopped at 1. Agreed on all of those points.
Yeah.
At Box Office Pulp said, seeing the Pirates films in theatres was a family tradition for me, so I'll always have a soft spot for the franchise, even if the later entries don't stack up anywhere close to the first film. At The Midnight Myth says, I remember seeing the trailer and thinking, this is so wrong it's right. Who knew you could build such an iconic movie out of a theme park ride? Perfect balance of humour, horror, and a pretty solid critique of colonialism. Also, I love Keira Knightley forever and always. Yeah, I mean, Keira Knightley is, like I say, she's fantastic.
Yeah, I would like to see her in more movies like this, which I know she has kind of become more of like the period piece actor, you know, like that's kind of what she's known for.
Yeah,
I think.
she tends to do more sort of serious roles, dramatic roles now.
And she's fantastic in them, but this was so much fun and she was so freaking good in it. I'd love to see her do a movie like this.
Me too.
Again.
I love Keira Knightley. I think she had a period kind of at this time where she was in pretty much everything, sort of in this time period, but I mean, she's so fantastic. And like you mentioned earlier, I think she's been drinking from the same fountain of youth as Keanu Reeves and Paul Rudd, because she looks the same now that she did then.
As she did. And she was 17. Like, what? Like, I'm still shocked by that.
I know. When Keira Knightley is off making these amazing movies and doing such a fantastic job against seasoned actors who are like more than twice her age.
Yeah.
And it's just ridiculous. At Hugo's Post said,
I was just watching a series of trivia on the pirates. I do love me some Jack Sparrow.
Again, we all love Jack Sparrow. He's perfect in this film. And then at S. Alexander Film,
one of the best blockbusters of the noughts, endlessly rewatchable. If you ever want to feel epic, just listen to the score.
Oh my God, the score is so great.
Yeah.
And at Kate Does,
awesome way of reintroducing a genre that had fallen out of fashion. Wish someone would do it this well with the Western, but also was one of the earliest examples of films that became unnecessary franchises.
And that's a really interesting comment, because I think they have tried with Westerns. They've tried to reboot old Westerns. They've tried to reinvent Westerns with the quite awful Cowboys and Aliens, which I hated with a passion.
I have not.
Oh, it was really bad. But I would like to see some genres of movies that have fell out of fashion, because I think Westerns specifically have fallen out of fashion.
Yeah.
That to reboot them in such a way would be wonderful. But
yeah, absolutely. I would be definitely interested to see something like that at this scale.
Yeah.
But yeah, who knows? Because it seems like right now the industry is really dominated by superhero films. So
yeah.
I don't know what next will happen.
No. But I am very happy to say that I believe this is coming up to the end of this episode. And we said, didn't we?
We did it.
We said that we wanted to make it shorter than the previous one. And
I think technically it is.
Well, I mean, I might edit some bits and pieces out, but I'm going to have to edit quite a lot out to make it shorter.
Okay.
But if it is longer than the last one, you have now broken the record that Kristin set. So if that's the case, then kudos to you, Sade.
Thank you.
Thank you for your excellent and wonderful opinions on Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. And obviously, now I would like to give you a little moment to obviously plug your wonderful show and tell people where they can find you and how they can listen to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I haven't thought about this movie in so long, so when you brought it up as a suggestion, I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, let me watch it. And it was just a great experience watching it and talking about it with you. If anyone is interested in my podcast, it's called Offscreen Babble. You can pretty much listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to follow us on social media, we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Offscreen Babble. We're also on Letterboxd. I'm trying to get back into that, so you can search our name, Offscreen Babble, on Letterboxd as well.
And yeah, I also have a letterbox, but I don't promote it either, so I should probably start doing that as well. But
it's so hard to track everything.
Yeah.
I'm like trying to get better at it because it's a great idea. It's just I'm lazy and I never do it on time, but I'm going to try to get better.
Yeah,
at it.
me too. I do try and keep it updated, but it is really tough because you think, well, I'll update Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and website and everywhere else. And it's just like, oh my God, I've got to do Letterboxd as well. You know, it's, if only there was like an app or something that just updated everything, that would be awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
There probably is that does like social media and stuff, but not that will do something like Letterboxd and your website and all of that kind of gubbins as well. But yeah, obviously, thank you so much for coming on Verbal Diorama. I think you're a wonderful person, and obviously, like I said before, I love your show, and more importantly, I genuinely love you as a person, because you're.
Oh wow! Thank you so much.
No,
I love you too. This is like so nice.
No, but I just feel like let's just gush over each other now. But you're so nice.
Like, wow.
but genuinely, like, my journey into podcasting has not been easy, and you have been there sort of every step of the way, and you know, you have been there kind of saying, well, when is your podcast coming out? I want to listen to you, like, get something out, and really kind of, you know, pushing me and supporting me, and yeah, honestly, everyone listening should obviously listen to your show because it's wonderful. And obviously, as a listener, I endorse that because I listen and I think it's great. I often kind of feel like sometimes it's easy for a show, sort of any show, to just kind of be a podcast and to not kind of engage with sort of other people or with listeners. And one thing I love about you and Kyle, and I know obviously you do the majority. I know that Kyle obviously does stuff, and, you know, let's not sort of say that Kyle doesn't, because he genuinely does do stuff. But you obviously manage a lot of the social media and the engagement with people. And I know that you work so hard at what you do, and that you're always kind of engaging on social media, but you're always so nice to everyone, like, and because
thank you.
Genuinely.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you even taking the time to say all of this, and I really feel like very supported by you as well, because like I mentioned before, there are so many times I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I literally trying to get people to listen to garbage? Like, I'm just like so mean to myself, you know? And then when I'm talking to you, or you always are really encouraging and have like great ideas and a lot of energy towards like, okay, let's try this thing, or do you want to do something else? And I just really appreciate that, because it's hard sometimes to make a product like a podcast and put it out for people. And you know, I guess I'm a little insecure about it. So, like, it is really nice to have someone there who is supportive.
Thank you.
During that time.
No, I really do appreciate you saying that. And yeah, obviously I didn't say that to you so that you would say it to me.
Oh, no.
But basically, everyone, what we're saying is that Verbal Diorama and Offscreen Babble are always there for each other and support each other. And obviously, I know like we mentioned earlier, I've already been on your show because we talked about Endgame, but obviously I very much hope that I can be on a future show as of yours, and that you can obviously then come on to another show of mine. And
yes, I would love you to come back on. We can obviously discuss at any point the upcoming movies that you'd want to review.
Well, obviously I feel exactly the same way, but it'll probably be an older movie with me, because I do tend to stick to the older movies. However, now I normally at this point I have a little bit of spiel that I say to kind of, oh well, this is what I'm going to do next, and it's not an older movie, it's a very, very recent one. Ooh. So it's a little bit different. To all the listeners, thank you for listening. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. My next episode will be out in 2 weeks, and I have a special guest who is coming on. It's someone who Sade knows, and my special guest will be Chin Lin from Bingeables podcast.
Oh, nice,
and
nice.
Chin Lin and I are very interested in a certain franchise which has just released a movie. So we will actually be looking at X-Men Dark Phoenix.
Oh, wow.
We're also we're going to talk a little bit about the X-Men movies in a nutshell. But obviously, we want to try and keep it below 3 hours. So it'll probably just primarily focus on Dark Phoenix. And if you like this episode, I've also done episodes on Titan AE, Captain Marvel, Dread, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow, Pleasantville, The Cabin in the Woods, Speed, and Aladdin. And they can all be downloaded wherever you get your podcasts from. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Verbal Diorama. And you can email me general hellos, feedback, or suggestions, verbaldiorama@gmail.com. If you like what I do and you want to give me a great review, you can do so on iTunes. And I'd really appreciate that. And as Sade mentioned earlier, it's really great when we get reviews. It really kind of lifts our spirits. So please do that if you like what we do. If you want to buy me a coffee, which I think people know that I pretty much run on coffee now, you can do so at ko-fi.com/verbaldiorama. Thank you again, Sade, for coming on the show. It's been wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are so welcome. Thank you everyone for listening. I will see you next time. And if you want pain, try wearing a corset. I mean, don't though. They're really super uncomfortable, and Verbal Diorama does not endorse corset wearing in any way. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.